Vice President Shabomahin,
Aye.
Trustee Bloom,
Yes.
Trustee Polito,
Aye.
Trustee Alexander.
Aye.
Quorum is present. I just want to say Happy New Year's to everyone and thank you for taking the time to have this special meeting. Now we will kick it off to item 3, board study session.
Yes, so the first item is to provide to the board an update from the School Improvement Working Group. And it's also a back to campus update on how we could potentially bring back students on campus, those students specifically being urgent learners. Okay, and I believe everyone has a copy of the deck via Agenda Online. I'm going to share my slides. And giving the context here, well, I'll provide context and then discuss in detail the COVID testing that we have in place and will be able to potentially roll out. And then have a conversation by sharing some information about how to bring urgent learners onto campus and then get some input, have some dialogue and get some input from each trustee. So our first strategic priority is to deliver rigorous, high quality instruction. But in the time of COVID, advancing strategic priority number 1 and most other strategic priorities means that we have to tackle 3 simultaneous challenges. One is strengthening distance learning. And most students will get most of their instruction, just keeping in mind, via remote learning. We have to consider how to bring more students on campus safely. We already have over 200 students in learning hubs, and we need to bring our urgent learners back as soon as possible as we can safely. Obviously, the reason why we want to pursue this is because remote learning is not working specifically for these students. And third, we need to start planning to accelerate learning for our students whose education has been massively disrupted by this remote learning since March. And we need to reimagine what is possible to accelerate our students' learning to make up for the disruptions of COVID. This is not just about a few weeks of summer school. This is a long-term plan, a multi-year process that we need to start acting upon now as soon as possible. So how are we tackling these? Currently, principals, the CNI team, curriculum and instruction team, the instructional coaches are working to strengthen current distance learning plans. We are even working on increase cycles that were interrupted by the events that took place last Wednesday. But we've been working on implementing increase cycles, going through the MTSS process, honing in on SMART goals like how to develop and implement strong instructional leadership teams, in addition to how to improve our literacy. And so we are focusing on specific literacy goals at each site. More students on campus is also another goal, bringing on more students on campus safely. So we're focusing on the School Improvement Working Group, helping us with this issue. And we have several committees, including the COVID testing and monitoring committee, so that we can ensure that we keep, well, mitigate as much risk as possible to keep staff safe and students safe. We're currently on campus and to be able to bring more students on campus if conditions permit. Okay. And then in regards to the long-term learning acceleration, and it's addressing learning loss, and we're still trying to work on how we want to frame that so it's not from a deficit perspective, is that we are developing a committee dedicated to this planning and execution. And so we are actually going to kick off that committee next week. So tonight's focus is how to bring more students back on campus safely. And we want to share information specifically around the COVID testing that's currently implemented and what we will be able to roll out. So right now, Ravenswood staff, we have the PCR test, which is the mouth swab test that is free for staff, and they are to take the test weekly, and the results come back in 2 to 4 days. So we kind of rolled this out and tried to educate and inform staff of why and give the rationale as to why it's very important to have a weekly testing cycle. And then also indicating when we have like a fifth, for example, HR, when we have a fifth of the department, I should use a larger department, say CNI, if we have a fifth of the department spread out to get tested throughout the week, we would be able to catch anyone potentially who might be a case in order to mitigate and quarantine the department so that we can prevent any spread. We shared that rationale, and now starting in January, we are making it mandated that all staff are tested. Currently with our Learning Hub, we're not offering testing to Learning Hub staff through the PCR, primarily because the MOU is only a contract with the Ravenswood City School District. And the Learning Hub staff right now can get tested on Tuesdays and Wednesdays through the county at the Ravenswood City, at Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School. So the city and the county are partnering with us, and we're a site that hosts the PCR testing as well, baseline testing. We are working with Menlo Park to also designate a testing site at Bellhaven School, and we have dates also scheduled there intermittently. Okay. And when we become aware of testing dates that are held throughout the city in East Palo Alto, HR department informs Learning Hubs so that staff members from the Learning Hubs and the community at large can get tested. So just an update on our testing provider curative, as I know many have probably read information that the FDA has put out. So our COVID PCR testing is processed through the county's contract with Curative. Curative is a company that is providing COVID testing to most districts in the county and in many Bay Area, in the Bay Area. Currently, Santa Clara, Contra Costa, San Mateo County are still using Curative. Last week, FDA raised the questions about the accuracy of Curative's testing, and the county does support us continuing to use Curative. The county has researched the issue, and they still recommend us to continue using it. And they said that Curative is submitting updated information to the FDA that they expect it will show better accuracy than the data that the FDA has reviewed now. I believe that the Curative, I think, has 70% of the testing market in California, so they have a lot of data to pull from. And there's the county and health officers are pretty confident that the data will reveal or answer questions that the FDA has posed. So we will still monitor the situation very closely and obviously rely on the advice from health officers from the county Department of Health. So we plan to offer COVID testing to all on-campus students so we can catch cases before they spread, okay? We plan to offer testing to any Ravenswood students who are on campus, whether or not they are in a learning hub or if they come on campus for in-person learning. So families would need to sign a waiver so test results can go directly to families and then obviously to district office. And then this way we can react and respond accordingly to any positive cases as soon as possible. And we are developing these protocols now so that we can roll out testing for students in February. We're really excited about exploring a pilot program to offer rapid testing, also known as antigen testing for COVID, and we are able to get the results within 15 minutes. So the county has offered Ravenswood and Redwood City, along with La Honda Pescadero, a chance to participate in this 8-week testing pilot that can potentially extend further. LA County and Merced County is also currently participating in the pilot. So first priority that we would like to focus on is making sure that the Learning Hub staff who are not currently tested regularly but are reporting to campus are tested. And then all students who are in our Learning Hubs are tested. So we are working closely, Student Services and HR and our team are working closely with Learning Hub staff. They're getting trained tomorrow and Thursday. We have central office staff, principals who are also going to get trained so that we become trainer of trainers and be able to train other staff to administer the antigen test. And we hope to be able to start the testing for staff who are in the Learning Hubs, regulated by the Learning Hubs, by late January, early February. And we are still working out the logistics to hopefully get our students tested in February. The process is to go ahead and start first with testing the adults, and then we roll out testing students. Okay. Moving on to now bringing back urgent learners. Our community is currently in the most restrictive tier due to the current COVID surge. And then you can look at what the different tiers are. San Mateo currently is in the purple tier. Okay. And that includes East Palo Alto. Now, when East Palo Alto, when the county was in the red tier, East Palo Alto's numbers would still classify us as being in the purple tier. So unfortunately, our community is still being hit even harder than the rest of the area, as you all know. And there's been about 3,155 cases in East Palo Alto as of January 8th, okay, as of this past Friday. And this means about 9% of East Palo Alto residents have or currently have diagnosed cases of COVID. What can change in the future, though, is the number of new cases per day that will indicate what tier we would fall into. And the goal is to prevent the spread and minimize new cases. This data obviously reflects that our community has significantly been impacted by COVID. Keeping the tiers in mind, we've been working with the School Improvement Working Group, and the recommendation is bringing urgent learners back under these conditions. So first, we want to be guided by the data in East Palo Alto and not the county as a whole. And we are able to calculate EPA's new cases and estimate the positivity rate. In purple tier, we're talking about only bringing back a very small number of students. And the number we're talking about, for example, is 11 TK students and 1 teacher. And then you see here as well, considering bringing back unique learners who are students with moderate to severe needs. And that's looking at 4 teachers and phasing in 1 to 3 students at a time, like 30 minutes to an hour at a time. So the increase from Learning Hubs to bringing students in person for learning is a relatively manageable number, right? In the red tier, if we had 2 weeks of declining cases, then we can start bringing back all our urgent learners, including TK through 1st grade, newcomers, and students with special needs, including mild to moderate students. And in the orange tier, we bring these students back, more quickly. Obviously, the rates would make us all feel more comfortable if we were all in the orange tier. So it's very important to note that we are only proposing to bring back urgent learner students at this time and staff who volunteer to return. Okay. And all families have the option to stay with distance learning. We can revisit these conditions as we get more data and learn from our work in trying to implement this. For example, if we find that implementing TK, bringing TK students on campus with a waiver approved by the county health officers and officials and the state, and also with our moderate to severe students, if we find that we are doing this successfully as we are doing with learning hubs, then we may want to look at another cohort, and we would like to bring back a report to the board how things are going so that we can make a decision on how to move forward. So the School Improvement Working Group will meet monthly and will report back to the trustees on how our status is with our first students that we bring back and recommend any other adjustments to these conditions. So we are going to propose to submit a county waiver asking to bring back a TK class and unique learners specifically. This is if we were in the purple tier. Well, I should say, this is when we are in the purple tier. So the TK class, again, we're only looking at 11 students. Nearly all want to return along with the teacher. There are 2 families that still have additional questions that would like answered. Students will stay together in a learning hub class after school. And we're currently finalizing details with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula, the classroom teacher, principal, and families. For the unique learners, which are students with our moderate to severe needs, we are looking at doing a slow return, really, making our decisions based on how our students are doing in response to coming on campus and how our services could be, how our services can support them best. We're looking at 1 to 3 students at a time for a very short period of time. I mentioned ranging from 30 minutes to an hour. And then we would just incrementally build from there. And then we are looking at having classes of no more than 9 with teacher and para, or I should say paras. 31 total possible students could be brought back in person across 4 classes. So that's 2 in preschool and 2 preschool classes, 1 class for our kinder through 2nd grade, and then 1 class for 3rd through 5th grade. So we already follow strong safety protocols for our staff who are currently on campus and the learning hubs for students who report to campus every single day. And we will only proceed if the county approves our waiver application. And again, we must have all the protocols that follow the 4 pillars of the recovery plan that are established from the county and which are established from the health department. We have already 200 students on campus through our learning hubs and have kept students and staff safe through solid safety protocols thus far, wearing face masks, they are social distancing, there's regular cleaning, there's designated spaces and signage to keep cohorts separate. We have health screening and COVID testing, and we have updated our recovery plan and will submit a waiver for approval by the County Office of Ed and the Department of Health. And then lastly, we are, again, this is just a study session to be able to get input, but we are asking the board to partake in a discussion and provide direction of our plans. So specifically, we request the board to input on and support for the School Improvement Working Group's recommendations on conditions to bring more students back on campus, which shows the 3 tiers when we're in purple, red, and orange. And then support for proceeding to bring TK unique learners back on campus. Again, our goal is to do that by January 25th, pending approval of our waiver. Okay, and that's the conclusion of this presentation. So I'd like to open it up, if possible. Trustee Latu.
Yeah, so I'll open the floor for discussion from the board.
Through the chair. Can you hear me? Okay. Can we go to that slide? What was it? Slide 13?
Yeah. Do you see the slide 13?
That
the
was
slide?
not the one I was thinking about. So the plan we have right now is you're recommending to bring all of our unique learners back on campus only for 30 to 60 minutes a week. Did I understand that correctly?
We want to, that's what I said. We want to start with that amount and then build upon it.
And how long is that starting period? Is that for like the first week or two? Is that the first month? Like we only have, I mean, we just started the second semester, but when you say start, how does that mean the first week or does that mean the first month? What is?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to increase as soon as possible the amount of time students are with teachers on campus so that we can provide the best services as possible. So I think it would be a mutual agreement with the families who are, who are also making the commitment to bring their children on campus. But it is dependent on how well it goes. I could ask Jennifer Gravum to kind of share her thoughts too on what conversations have been had.
But the proposal is based on purple tier. As long as we're in purple tier, this is what the recommendation is, or are you planning to gradually increase that number even while we're in the purple tier?
Yeah, we want to increase that number even if we're in purple tier. That's just the starting point. So we get a feel of how it goes and then we want to build upon that. We don't want to stay at 30 minutes a day.
Like I would love for us to be able to say we're evaluating this every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, have like metrics where we say we're checking in and we're seeing that this is working, we're able to grow, or we're seeing it's not working, we need to improve these areas in order to be able to grow. I feel like I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that we're going to start like this and we're not really designating at what point are we determining that we can grow, because 30 minutes to 60 minutes a week for unique learners seems the most bare minimum. Also for TK, I'm understanding based on your presentation, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have one class at Castaño. So that means Bellhaven would not be hosting a TK class, correct?
At this time, we're piloting with willing staff and willing families. Yeah.
Okay, so I am understanding that correctly. And how long is this pilot for?
That's not a pilot.
I thought you said you're piloting at Castaño.
Oh no, so when I mean pilot is we are starting with TK, but it doesn't mean we're going to stop. We will continue. And then to respond to your question about reporting, we expect our cadence to report back to the board, for example, in February to both meetings. So that's about a 2-week cadence. And we would like to be able to say, look, the first meeting in February, it's going great. We actually want to reconsider modifying these conditions so that we can add another cohort of students on campus.
So moving back a couple, so when I was asked about TK, it's because Bellhaven is not hosting a TK class at this point, right? My question was more around how long are we waiting before we also make TK available for Bellhaven families and students in the way that we're making it available for Castaño? And is it those 2 weeks that you're talking about, every board meeting, you're going to say, I just want to like, what is the time frame we're telling some families, you know, your kids are returning in this capacity, but other families are not. That's going to be frustrating for families to process and understand, unless we're saying, you know, we're starting off like a, you know, to your point, how you initially started is this is our pilot program at Castaño. And after this amount of time, we're going to evaluate what worked, what didn't work, and we're going to duplicate this out Bayhaven. Or is it, are we telling Bellhaven, we don't know if we're bringing back, if we don't know if we're going to have a TK class for the rest of the
No.
semester? It's
So
just,
those are good questions. You asked a couple, and I want to clarify first, and then I'll talk about the impact of other sites. And then Jen, you can chime in here, but right now the 30 to 60 minutes is every day. It's 30, 60 minutes daily, Jen?
Yeah, so what we are doing, and I'm meeting with the teachers weekly. So you asked in terms of like, how are we evaluating it? I'm meeting with those teachers who are bringing kids on campus weekly to see how it's going. Our hope is to bring kids in to kind of reorient them into school. This is how we wear our masks. This is how we stay this many feet apart, and bringing them in and getting them used to it, and then hoping that we can increase the number of students based on their understanding. Because we're talking about kids who may be nonverbal, maybe really don't understand that why they're coming back to school because it's been so long. So each week we want to look at the schedule and slowly increase the time based on the ability of the student to be able to kind of attend to school and be in that environment and reorient, because at this point they've been out of school for a year, and it's going to be really hard for them to understand and to shift. So with our preschoolers, same thing. We're going to evaluate this every single week. How can we increase the time while also providing the services online for the families who don't want to return to school, because the population of students kindergarten through second grade is 8 kids, and then third grade to fifth grade is 8 kids, and they have 1 teacher. So the teacher has to be able to provide distance learning to the parents who want to keep their kids home, and then try to find out how we can provide in-person learning to those who are coming in. So it's a little bit of a balance, and I'm working really closely with the teachers, and also want them to feel safe and secure and be able to come in and feel good about that. And they and the paras are very willing to try and work through this together.
okay,
Yeah.
but the presentation does state that it's 30 to 60 minutes per week, not per day. So am I hearing that it will be per day?
Actually, the presentation on slide 13.
14.
shows-
It says 1 to 3 students at a time for short periods. Start with 30 to 60 minutes per week and build from there.
We'll be bringing in at least 1 kid per day, maybe 2 kids per day at the beginning to start with that orientation, and then slowly growing it.
Oh, okay. I think your slide 14 contradicts the per day per week, and that's where I saw it. But it's good that you're clarifying that
Yeah.
right now. So thank you. Because
Yeah.
your 14 says per week, and I was like, per week.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
why I was kind of thrown off by
Sorry.
that.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, and considering the high positivity rate of cases in East Palo Alto, we are trying to strategically walk the line on how to pull the entire community forward and be in support of bringing students on campus. And right now, the reason why we targeted TK in this specific class is because we have over 90% of the families who want to participate in in-person learning, along with a teacher who wants to volunteer. And regardless if the teacher wanted to volunteer or not, we could bring this class on campus as a learning hub. And we can, I think, emulate what's been happening with the Learning Hub and be confident that we can actually bring in this TK as an in-person class, because we would model and implement same strategies and practices that we do with the Learning Hub. With the unique learners, the reason why we want to start with the unique learners is because special education department has also been bringing in students one-on-one in person for assessment. So the one-on-one learning for 30 minutes to 60 minutes is similar practice to what they're doing now when they do assessments. So it's not new things that we're learning to make sure that we can make sure this is going to go well. Additionally, we mentioned how we rolled out learning hubs. We rolled out learning hubs slowly, intentionally, carefully to ensure success, and then to build, most importantly, confidence. We have to build confidence and assurance and have assurances in place. Not only management being able to coordinate these efforts, but to also have willing staff and willing families to be engaged and be engaged and follow through with the safety protocols that are needed for everyone to remain safe. So we want to start off small, like we did with learning hubs, with how we roll out our in-person learning. And then as the confidence builds, I'm only encouraged that we will have more participants volunteering from staff, and then obviously families who will be more comfortable bringing students on campus.
Wouldn't we be able to learn from the learning hub so that we don't have to start at such a slow pace as we did the learning hubs, because we've had the experience of bringing kids back on campus in the hubs, learn from them, being able to modify them to meet the standards, the safety standards, to meet, hopefully maintaining, well, we should be maintaining the quality of instruction. Wasn't that kind of also the purpose of the learning hubs, to give us that groundwork so that when we did attempt to bring students back in person, we were kind of more ahead of the game than if we started at ground zero?
You are correct. We have a lot to learn from the learning hubs, and a slow, successful start is number one that we learn from. A second thing that we learn from is, well, one thing that's not the same as learning hubs is we're not managing the staff. The learning hubs are operated by other organizations. So Ravenswood technically has not worked with staff working with students on campus yet. So Ravenswood will implement what Boys and Girls Club has done successfully, what 49ers Academy has done successfully, what East Palo Alto Tennis and Tutoring has done successfully. Ravenswood staff want to also do that successfully with our own staff.
So through the chair, I just want
But I just want to
can I ask
reinforce
a
that
clarifying question?
from that model?
Yeah.
That was part of the point of those models.
Yeah.
Through the chair, can I ask a question, a clarifying question? Okay, so I know, because I'm a parent and my daughter is in the learning hub, I know that teachers are not teaching the kids in the learning hub yet. And I think one of the things Gina said is that the reason that the TK class at Castaño is happening is because there is a teacher who is willing to come back, right, and be present in the classroom. And so I think that we also have to be mindful and consider that bringing kids back is also part of it, is having the teachers that are present and available to be there, right? So I think that that's one thing that I guess that's the question, right? So if we're making this plan, where we're talking about the learners coming back, how are the teachers fitting in that are when we bring them back? Like, are we saying, okay, we're going to bring the TK class back at Belhaven because the TK class at Castaño worked really well? Will that teacher plan to be there present, or like how is that going to be rolling out as well?
Trustee Bloom, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please. Sorry.
We would definitely, again, it's to build confidence. So we don't only have teachers from of students who we want to bring back in the purple tier willing to participate. We have other teachers of urgent learners who want to come back, who would potentially come back in the red and orange tier. I think at the last board meeting, I showed you the number of staff members that were willing to participate, and I'll maybe try to get a staff member, my team, to help me get those numbers exactly. Cindy, I don't know if you could pull up the number of staff who are willing to come back, but we will have to negotiate with our bargaining with RTA about them coming back onto campus. And so I would like to do it based on evidence, based on success, and based on the fact that we can pull off a safe return to campus for in-person learning, and do that first with willing staff and willing families, because not all families want to come back either. And I'm sorry, Cindy, do you have the number by any chance?
I was not able to pull up the previous presentation, but I know off the top of my head, given the spaces that we have gone into to make sure that the facilities would be okay to have the number of kids coming back, we're potentially looking at the next set of urgent learners would be one of the teachers at Bellhaven and one of the teachers at Los Robles as the next set.
And that's I don't know, Trustee Bloom, if I answered your question, but that's another thing to consider. Thank you, Cindy. That's another thing to consider is space, because currently our learning hubs are serving quite a number of students. And when we start considering how to bring students for in-person learning, we have to figure out how, if that's going to displace our learning hubs, how our learning hub's going to support in-person learning. So there are those logistics as well. And the tapering of how, or the staggered start of how we bring students back will allow us the time to also plan accordingly so that we don't lose our hubs, and the hubs actually provide support for students who are not coming in person, or they provide programming for students at the end of the day, like we suggest for TK.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification that there are other pieces of the puzzle that also have to fit. And so, I mean, I agree. I think that the slower start makes sense because it does take time to get all the pieces together to make it function well. And so that's why I asked that clarifying question.
Through the chair. I have 3 questions that came to mind during the presentation. The first question is, with bringing back our unique learners to campus for short amounts of time, what kind of transportation are we looking at? Are the children going to be, are the parents providing the transportation? Is the district providing the transportation? And how will that work with parent work schedules? Do you want all 3 questions at the same time, or do you want me to wait between questions?
Yeah, let's wait between questions.
Okay, so there's the first question.
Yes, Jen.
I can answer that very specifically. We have a kiddo who is coming to the district office because one of our program specialists is fluent in sign language. And so she's giving her sign language instruction here at the district office. We just put in the transportation form for her to be brought here for a few hours for sign language instruction and then go back home. So it's going to be a very interesting, complex schedule that we are creating, but we are very committed to doing that. Some of our parents are going to want to drive their kiddos, especially our young ones. They're going to want to help them transition. Others of our parents are working and they can't do that. And so we are here and willing to make that happen. We're about to start one next week.
Thank you, Ms. Gravum. I look forward to hearing how that works next week. All right, so question number 2. When we start bringing back classes onto campus, are you going to be doing a hybrid model, or where the kids will come 2 days a week for a couple hours, and then the other 3 days a week, they will be full-time distance learning? Or will the kids be coming back 5 days a week in the mornings and then going home? I mean, I'm curious to know how you're bringing them back, which also leads to the third question, which I'll just go ahead and ask. And that is, if you're going to be doing a hybrid versus a full day model, or a hybrid versus full-time distance learning model, are you going to have to reorganize classes in order to make sure that parents who want full-time distance learning for the rest of the year can receive it, and parents who want their kids to go back in a hybrid or full-time model, that they will have that ability to go back? So I know that that's a very big can of worms question, but when we're thinking about how to bring the kids back on campus, looking at the guidelines that were given, if we have a class of 24 children, you can't have all of them in the classroom at the same time. And so I can see Ms. Berenen's I can read lips. And so when we're looking at those 24 children, 12 of them are on campus and 12 of them are not. Will we try to make it so that the 12 on campus are receiving the ones that want hybrid, and the 12 that don't go to campus are getting full-time distance learning from another teacher? Or is the same teacher going to have to somehow do double duty? Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my question.
It's a great question, and we've been tackling this one as well, and Lotta can chime in too. I will add quickly here that the urgent learners that we want to bring back in person while we are in the purple tier will be children who can come every single day. So our TK class, because there's only 11 students, will be able to come to class with their teacher every single day. And we're scheduling it until about 1 o'clock. And then the Learning Hub is going to pick up the students for the remainder of the day, which is fantastic. And same with our unique learners will be able to come every day and then build upon their 30 to 60-minute time slot. We are looking at the number of students in our other classes of urgent learners who want to come to campus and those families who don't want to come to campus within the class. We believe that we want to minimize as much disruption as possible right now, and not disrupt any other class, and change any caseloads and have another teacher of record to make a set of students be able to come onto campus. It's already a challenging time right now, and getting feedback from families too, the impact that would have right now in the middle of the year for our families to learn and build relationships with new teachers. With remote learning already being challenging, we wanted to avoid that. And so we are working with teachers who are volunteering to come back and identifying students who want to come back and kind of working with that balance. And so, Lotta, did you want to share a little bit about some of the potential schedules that we are working with?
Sure. Yeah, I can share a little bit. So as Trustee Alexander said, as the schedules are highly dependent on the number of students who want to come in person versus the number who want to remain fully virtual. And so we're having to make those decisions based on the numbers within each class and also what will work for that teacher. It's really important to us to be creative and innovative at this time. And also because these teachers are volunteering to come in person, to try to think like what would be the best conditions for that teacher to serve his or her students both in person and virtual. So a few of the different like schedule considerations we're looking at are teaching the in-person students in the morning and teaching the virtual students in synchronous learning in the afternoon. In that specific example, the virtual students would also be able to have a specials class virtually in the morning, which is already in place, and then have asynchronous learning opportunities at other times in the day, at a time of their choosing, of course. And then another example is actually, in this case, the teacher is hoping that there will be a majority of her students who want to come in person. And so in that case, it would be like an A day, B day kind of hybrid schedule that we've discussed before, so that the students can stay a longer period of time. And in that case, the teacher would really like to try out teaching the students in person and then having her virtual or at-home students join that lesson via Zoom at the same time. And she's thinking about it almost like stations or small groups, like being able to address the in-person students in one part of the lesson and address the students on Zoom at another part. So I think just like with the different models we discussed over the summer when we were considering a hybrid return to school model, there's some difficult decisions to be made, but we're really trying to maximize the learning time for both groups of students as much as we can.
So if I can rephrase what you just said, Laura, to make sure that I understand correctly, you want to keep the teachers and with their students that they've been assigned as much as possible through the end of the year. What being creative around the hybrid versus full-time distance learning possible based on parent and student needs. Okay, thank you very much.
Other comments?
I do want to express a concern about returning when East Palo Alto particularly is still in the purple tier. That's just a concern I have. I know that teacher vaccines are rolling out by the end of this month is what I'm hearing. And then we'll go from there. But I just want to voice the concern of it's still a very deadly, dangerous disease, and it's still very rampant in our community.
Through the chair.
Yes, Trustee Polito.
And I thank you, Trustee Alexander, for voicing that concern. I actually want to voice the concern of the other side of that is that I understand and being in East Palo Alto in the purple tier, San Mateo County as a whole went into purple tier. And I want to remind everybody that even with the county going into purple tier, there was no elementary that stopped in-person instruction that I'm aware of. Most of them are continuing or scaled down the amount of students, but the ones that I'm familiar with that are locally were still in-person instruction to some form. And we continue to, I believe we're the only district in the county that has not brought students back for in-person instruction to any capacity. I don't know if Trustee Alexander is shaking her head because she's thinking of a school district that she knows. But to my knowledge, I don't know any other elementary in the local area that's not doing in-person instruction at all. So for me, this is of critical importance that we work together to solve this. I know we've been having these discussions all last semester about teacher availability, about classroom capacity, about safety. You know, we started a task force that would talk about all the different areas that we would have to consider before bringing kids back. This is not a conversation that has begun tonight. It did not a month ago. This is a conversation that has started since we went back in March into, shelter in place. It started some time afterward because we didn't know how long this problem would continue for. So when I heard that we were going to move to bring students back, I was hopeful they would be at a larger capacity. And I understand that we're dealing with restrictions, but given that there is, changing factors like the vaccine, right? I'm hoping this is going to expedite the way in which we can bring our students back for in-person class instruction. And I'm hoping that, the goalposts won't be moved once that becomes readily available. I'm devastated to think that our students will potentially be an entire year without being back on our campuses, connecting with teachers and learning in the classroom, which is the best way for them to do so. So that is my 2 cents, because I hear a lot of frustration and stress from families who this has become very burdensome for. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you. To the chair, may I add, even though we may not have in-person learning in Ravenswood, we are one of very few districts that do have learning hubs, and we've been very successful on being able to bring over 200 students onto our campuses, where a lot of districts don't have learning hubs to be able to support families. So we should be very proud about that piece, and we want to use it as a model also to staff in general, that we have Boys and Girls Club staff, we have 49er staff, East Palo Alto staff, working with students, and it can be done on site, to your point, Trustee Polito. But there are other districts in our county that don't have elementary back in person. I believe Belmont Redwood Shores, for example, is one. Our current local charter schools here in the district are not open for in-person learning. I think even the primary school is not in person. And so we are in the forefront and bringing students in East Palo Alto in person for learning, which I'm very proud about, but doing not because we are putting anybody at risk, but we have experience and we have gained an understanding on how to do this slowly but surely. So that again, we need to build confidence. We need to build our community's confidence so that we can move forward collectively. Like the last thing I really want is for us to have dissension among the ranks. And that will rub off onto our students and our students' learning. I need for our team to recognize the benefits of in-person learning, which I'm sure everyone does know, but that we can do this safely. And we've demonstrated that, and I want to make sure we do it right and we build upon it this year so that when things are in a better place next year, I'm very optimistic, with vaccines in place, with regular scheduled testing cycle in place, we have kids on campus, and it's not going to be where we have kids on campus every day. We're going to have a hybrid model possibly, which we have not experienced yet, that we're going to have to learn how to do properly and successfully.
Through the chair.
Thank you. Oh, yes, Trustee Shabomhin.
If you want to talk, you can go ahead and I'll wait.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. And to that point, Superintendent Sudaria, I've been so quiet because I feel so conflicted for a number of reasons about going back to school or prolonging going back to school. It's yeah, it's something we've never experienced this before. I don't know what the right thing to do is, but to that point, I think that to me, if the focus is on in the meantime and afterwards, once we go back to possibly a hybrid model, how can we give our students the best possible experience of learning online? Like, to me, that's where a lot of focus needs to be. How can we make this work? What's the model that makes this work? This class over Zoom, this meeting over Zoom. And I think and I know people are thinking about that, but I feel like understanding that even when we come back together in a space and that only a few students can be on campus, at a time, on this day or whatever, like there will still be students learning from home. And so how can we truly maximize that? And what's the model that works so that someone is engaged to log on, so that someone is actually learning? Like, what does that look like? Does that mean fewer students on a Zoom, right, with a teacher so that they can get, better instruction and all of that? So I would like to, I don't know if the group is focusing on that, like how to make that work better for our students, but that's not going away. Even as we come back to campus, there's still going to be a piece of that. So just wanted to add that here.
In response, Trustee Shabomhin, I think that's what we didn't want to establish another committee to focus on remote learning, because that is currently the work that C&I department is supporting our teams with. And like I said, we have specific targeted goals focusing on strategic priority 1 around rigorous instruction. And we are focusing on how to move forward with providing strong literacy instruction, as well as building our instructional leadership team to support teachers with implementation of the instructional core, even while doing the remote learning. And that is an everyday challenge on top of bringing back students. But yes,
sure,
the majority of our students right now are remote learning. So we have to make sure that is first, direct instruction is strong there.
Thank you. I'm just going to add a little bit of my 2 cents. Thank you for the update. It was really good to hear kind of where we are and where we're trying to go. We're going through something that's never been experienced, and so I think that the work that's being done is great, and we're heading into a direction. I think my question goes towards testing. I know that a lot of the testing sites here in East Palo Alto require an ID, and we have a high undocumented population, especially when it comes to our students. So I just wanna hear if there's any talks or works going on about how we can ensure the safety of our undocumented families. And if there's none, how can we move forward with making sure that they feel safe to get tested?
Yeah, so we are not going to actually require an ID from families for our students to get tested, but a waiver will need to be signed for our students to participate in testing. And then that's at the discretion of the families who are willing to have their child participate in testing. We want to encourage the testing for students as well. And so parents can opt in, but they don't have to participate. Tony, do you have any additional information about the need for or the protection of our families through the testing process? I don't think we're required to ask them for an ID.
We're not required to ask for identification.
Once the waiver is signed, then we are able to assess the student on a regular basis.
That's correct.
Without having to pull the family in each time.
That's correct.
Perfect, thank you. So during this time, I will open the floor for the public. I noticed that we had a hand up.
Through the chair, I have another question for Superintendent Sudaria.
Yes, Trustee Alexander.
My question has to do with the kids that are already in the learning hubs. With a return to in-person learning, the children who are in the hubs come already from many different classrooms, many different teachers, or several different teachers possibly. So they'll go into their classroom where the teacher is for their in-person instruction, and then after school for their after-school care, which Learning Hub provides for them as well. Do they go back to the Learning Hub? And then what happens with kids crossing bubbles at that point?
Cindy, do you want to share the work that we're doing with Boys and Girls Clubs specifically around this, which I want to just commend BGCP's flexibility and collaboration on this process?
Yeah, so we have people from the Boys and Girls Club as part of the School Improvement Working Group, and so they've been definitely involved and aware of the board's preference in terms of trying to have more kids on campus. And so with that in mind, and then knowing which teachers were interested to first come onto campus, we had been tracking which families were interested, and then which families were then in current learning hubs, right? And so once we had those numbers, we worked with the Boys and Girls Club. And so the Boys and Girls Club are able to actually provide enough staff where we would not be cross mixing the hubs. So essentially, if myself and Superintendent Sudaria were in a hub previously, and now our teacher wants to teach in person, then we would come out of that hub, we would be with our teacher, plus the other kids from our class who want to be in person. And then that becomes a new grouping.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jim.
Thank you. So now we will move to public comment.
So Ava Ochoa, I'm going to promote you, and you are the first person I'm doing this with, so there you go. And you should be allowed to talk. Ava, are you there?
You need to unmute so that you can speak.
So I see we might be having some technical difficulties. So while we wait for Eva, we will move on with Helen Levy. If we can promote her.
All right, Ms. Levy, you should be able to speak.
Miss Levy, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself, we'll be able to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Well, sorry, I totally forgot what I was going to ask, but it was a long question. So I'm out of state right now, right? So am I going to be, when I go back, should I get tested when I go back to work in person?
Tony, would you like to respond to that?
I will communicate directly with Ms. Levy.
Thank you, Miss Tony.
All right, and Ms. Ochoa, are you able to unmute and talk now?
We may have lost her.
Yeah,
She may have walked away.
she must have.
So if we don't have any more comments from the floor, we can close out this section and move on to,
Just through the
oh,
chair.
sorry.
Prior to, I just wanted to get consensus from, or get direction from the trustees on being able to move forward with putting plans in place based on the conditions. And then also if we're able to proceed with TK and unique learners, if we can get direction from the board to proceed with TK and unique learners coming on campus while we are in purple tier and pending approval of the waiver.
Through the chair, I'm okay with doing that. I'm actually looking for more as soon as possible, as everyone has probably already heard. So that's my input.
Through the chair, I am also okay with the plan.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I am also fine with the plan.
And through the chair, I am also fine with the plan as it is. But I really want to see the plans once they're fully in place before we reopen.
I would love to add metrics as into so.
I'm also in agreement with the plan. I do hope that you take the feedback that was presented to make some adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just also want to clarify, the learning hubs are still open. So any family, right, that needs care or help or wants their student back on campus with interaction and focus, there is room. I just want to make that clear, if that's true or not, Gina.
Superintendent Sidari, do we still have space? Because I know it's not kind of an unlimited capacity. Is there still space in the current hubs, learning hubs?
So we have a wait list, but we're working with the Boys and Girls Club though to open up additional pods. For example, oh my gosh, Los Robochon McNair, and then also at Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School.
Okay.
We are putting plans in place. It's a great need. And we actually had a parent join another district meeting making the request. So reach out to your site principal, reach out to the organizations. We have it on our website and we will work with you.
So now we will move on to item 3B. I
Yes.
will pass it over.
Right, so this is when we're going to dive into the facilities study session. We've had several board members in the past. Currently, Anna Maria Perlito has been participating in the facility committee. Sharifa Wilson, former board member, also participating in the design and work of bringing and updating the middle school. And so we also have a lot of work that we want to share with you that we've been focusing on to maximize the resources around our facilities. We've had several different stakeholder meetings over the years. We've brought in families to have conversations about this. We've connected with staff. This is an opportunity to have the new board come together and have a discussion about these projects that are coming up, and more importantly, fold in the community at large who have not participated in some of these meetings to learn about the work that's been happening and the excitement around the possibility of the upgrade of the Ravenswood Middle School and how we can maximize our facilities to work for us to sustain our district. And Will Eggers is going to facilitate this conversation. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Gina. And would you mind letting me share my screen during this?
Yes, and I should know by now, it naturally comes to me to say Will Eggers. It's Eggers.
Eager, no S.
I know. Actually, Solomon, I will need, I think I have the ability to do this.
Well, we can just let my sort of punny last name just hang over us for a little bit longer, I guess, then.
Go for it, Will Eager. It is all yours. I believe you have access.
I believe I do. Thank you, Gina, and good evening, trustees. Glad we can cover this in one of your first meetings beyond sort of your induction. So excited to talk about this. As Gina mentioned, this is taking part. This is in no way sort of a new conversation, but really a continuation of a much longer conversation that members of the community, trustees, parents, families, students have all been taking place in. So excited to share some of my observations and learning since I started about 6 months ago. And also just really excited to get your feedback and your thoughts as we sort of learn about the assets and growth areas of our facilities overall. So just to sort of clarify our goals here, I think sort of a couple sets of goals. One is just for the board and our community to gain just a deeper understanding of the district's facilities. We own a significant amount of land, as we'll see, throughout the East Palo Alto, Menlo Park area. And I think that we've been able to make significant investments in our facilities, but as we'll also see, there's significant need across almost all of our school buildings and sites. The second piece is we're looking to get sort of early thoughts on a number of facility questions. We are not coming today, with a couple of exceptions, with sort of full plans that we're asking you to vote on or approve. At this point, we're really just trying to get some initial thoughts and wonderings, a sense of as a board member, I do really support this idea. Please go spend staff time investigating this. Or I really want to know this, that, or something else before sort of spending too much time on this. So, part of our goal is really to ask those sort of key questions and help us explore, what sort of guidance you'd like us to be doing here. A couple of people have made this observation to me over the last couple of weeks, and I thought it was just a good sort of thing to clarify and put on this title side of the district is really, I think, unusually blessed with land. And, in many ways, it's along with the staff and obviously the people and our students, one of our biggest assets. And it really raises the question about how do we want to use it to best support our students, to sort of invest in our schools and to provide safe, welcoming environments for all of our students and families. And that's kind of, I think, the thing to keep in the back of your mind of what should we be doing with our space overall. Part of the reason that we wanted to present in a special study session with sort of significant time dedicated to this is because this is a fairly complicated issue, and the pieces really sort of do fit together overall, right? It's not the kind of thing that you can sit down and make maybe a one-off decision on without really understanding the bigger picture. And, as Gina and I have been having conversations with different stakeholders over the last couple of weeks or months, really, I should say, about this, one thing that I think Gene and I are sort of struck by is, any individual decision may actually look a little funky or may not quite make sense or may not quite add up. But once you sort of are able to see some of the whole picture here, things really start to come together, I think, in a helpful and holistic way. And so part of our goal is to help the board understand sort of how we're thinking about all of this together, and also just as importantly, help the community understand how we're thinking about this all together. And again, next steps here are for you guys to give us some sort of high-level guidance here, and for us to bring back options to you with some recommendations at a future time on some of these sites. So our goal today is really not to make decisions with a couple of exceptions, but really just to get some of that high-level guidance that I think will be really valuable for us moving forward. So turning into just the high-level agenda here, we are going to talk through all of our school sites. We'll talk through some of the charter schools, the 2 charter schools in the district that we provide facilities due to state regulations for. And we'll also talk about a couple of the main non-school properties. And then close with just a couple of outside grant opportunities we want to make sure the board and the community is aware of and that we're actively pursuing. So just to set a little bit of context here, we have 9 large properties across East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. You can see them here on the map. Many of them are sort of the familiar sites, and you'll notice that this map's a little bit unusual. It's a state parcel map, so it shows some kind of interesting, subdivisions, or in some cases, lack of subdivisions. But just a couple of sort of familiar schools. We have Bellhaven, CCRMS, Castano, the district office, the overall Brentwood campus, including, of course, Los Robles, Ronald McNair, the primary school, IHSD, BGCP is also located at that site, as well as EPACS, the Aspire site. Menlo Oaks and Willow Oaks, the flood site, and of course, this sort of mystery site 14, which is sort of a legacy site that's not actually part of the district anymore. It used to be part of the district, and it's actually part of the city that seceded from us a long time ago, and is currently a school that is occupied by another district. So altogether, across the entire cities here, we have over 4.2 million square feet of space. A significant amount of the overall space in East Palo Alto. And as we're thinking about sort of how we're using that space, it's worth highlighting that already today, rental income, as we talked about at our first interim budget update, is a growing portion of our overall revenue. You can see that in sort of the dark red section here. It's a growing share of our overall revenue. And we lease to a whole host of organizations across the district. I'm pretty sure I captured all of them here, but it would not surprise me if it found out that I was actually missing one. You can see all of the logos of the organizations that we currently lease to across the district. This represents both a significant revenue source for us and also, significant amounts of team time to maintain these sites, negotiate leases, make sure that we're supporting them effectively, and also make sure that they're using the space appropriately. If they're investing in the site, making sure we have an oversight function of it, making sure that they're maintaining it well or investing in the site in a way that we'd like them to. So as we think about some of our school buildings, so we sort of talked a little about sort of how we're using some of these sites for rental revenue. As we think about our specific school buildings, this is data from a facilities master plan that was conducted in 2015. And it highlights for each of our schools, when they were built, when the last major renovation happened, and then a couple of categories here. Critical facility needs are things not always necessarily totally critical, but you can think of things that are related to the structural integrity of the building and the costs it would take to repair those. Educational program needs you can think of as improving classrooms, making sort of spaces 21st century learning ready. And you have future facility needs, which generally reflect growth or the fact that over time, buildings deteriorate and will need future investments. Focusing just on these 2 categories, we need to invest in 2015, inflated for today's dollars, about $240 million across our 4 school sites. It's a significant amount of money. Now, luckily, prior administrations and prior board members have done a great job of helping us raise bond money. And over the last 5 years, we've issued 2 bonds, which is actually an unusual amount of bonds for us in such a short amount of time, raising $90 million in bond money. That's a pretty sizable dent in the overall sort of level of need here. And we're excited to show some of those investments that we've made sort of publicly, and I'm sure a lot of our community members who are joining us tonight, including potentially some of our trustees, have been able to see the new playgrounds, new site investments that we've made. But we still need about $140 million of new bond money to address some of the identified needs from a couple of years ago. So there's still significant needs in our facilities as identified by the facilities master plan several years ago. Two sort of just quick slides on that bond money pieces. You know, it's helpful to think in my mind about the amount of bond money that we've raised and expended on a per pupil basis to help us compare to other districts in the county. And I've shown this slide a lot because I think it helps sort of highlight one, you know, over 20 years, we've invested over almost $30,000 per student in our facilities, which is a good chunk of money. However, compared to a lot of the schools in the area, it's actually quite a bit less. And so over a 20-year period, if we had invested about as much as the typical school in San Mateo County, we would have invested $55 million more in our facilities. I'd also add that not shown on this slide is the role of outside donors, outside parents, outside philanthropists who maybe have chosen to give into some of their individual school sites. We've heard anecdotally that many of the schools on this have actually done an effective job of raising outside funds, not through bonds, to improve their sites, add classrooms, you know, build high-tech labs or things like that. This isn't something that, as I understand, Ravenswood has done a significant job of, have made sort of a significant focus area in the past. That's not to say we haven't received significant programmatic investments. We have through REF and others, and not to say we haven't received facilities investments. I think some of you may have seen science classrooms, for example, donated by various foundations. More to say, I think that that's an area of growth for us. And I think, as we're going to highlight in this presentation, we're interested in going out and finding new ways of bringing new money in beyond bond revenue, which to some extent is, you know, taxing our community, literally is taxing our community. As we sort of think about where we are with our bond money, the two bonds that we've passed are Measure H and Measure S. At this point, Measure H is pretty much entirely expended. So you can see that combine these two, you know, we did about 70 million in Measure S, about 25 million or so in Measure H. We call that sort of roughly $90 million. We've spent roughly $30 million of that 90 million or so that we've raised. We're planning and we're excited to sort of unveil this publicly to some extent. For CCRMS, we're making about $50 million of investment there. There's another about 5 million or so here of projects that we've committed to doing. We haven't spent the money yet, but we're planning on doing it. And that leaves us, if you sort of take the 90 minus the 30 minus the 50 minus the 5, with about $5 million remaining. Over the last couple of months, the team and I have been sort of investigating different projects and things like that. And we've identified about $20 million of desired projects. So just highlighting, you know, we've done a good job, I think, of investing quickly in our schools, raising bond money, spending it quickly to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck there. And are excited that we're not done yet. A lot of this money is budgeted, but not yet unspent. But we do have sort of significant remaining needs as we think about moving forward here. That was some high-level context just sort of on where we are as a district. Are there any questions on any of the slides sort of in this first section here? Great. So I want to talk through a couple of the individual schools. I want to spend a little bit of time on each school, but I want to spend most of my time on CCRMS. So as I mentioned, we're investing $50 million on that site. And this includes a number of very exciting new changes to the site. The first is we're excited to build the district's first two-story building. It's going to have a real 21st century media center and what we're calling a collegiate style courtyard that the media center will look out upon. We're also changing sort of the overall entrance to, really the entrance experience to CCRMS. So there's a single point of entry into the school. That'll allow us to hopefully take down some of the interior fencing, make the overall site campus safer, and also just make it clearer to families, you know, as they're looking for where to go into the building, have one sort of place for single entry into the space. We're also excited that as a part of this project, we're going to make every classroom in the wings of the school a new classroom or a renovated classroom. So all of our money is really going to improving our classrooms here. right? Some of it, I guess, is going to the media center, but pretty much all of the money is focused on the spaces that students spend most of the day. And we're excited that and Trustee Polito, who I assume is hopefully here, has done a really good job to the facility subcommittee of pushing us to make that focus and make that really strategic investment sort of in our classrooms directly. So without sort of further ado, here is what that new entrance point will look like. This is sort of, imagine yourself in the very back corner of the parking lot at CCRMS. And you can see that new beautiful 2-story building here. There's going to be sort of 3 classrooms on the top floor, 3 classrooms on the bottom floor, another sort of classroom / elevator space here. This will be office space / workspace / sort of an assistant principal's office where they can kind of look out in this nice courtyard here. And then the media center, not shown, is right here. We'll show you that more on the next slide. This here is a new bank of classrooms. It's actually going to be in the existing parking lot, so a little bit in. We will lose a couple of parking spaces here, but we believe from our analysis that we'll still be able to have enough parking for students, families, and staff. This then is our main single point of entry here. So this is, as you're coming into the site, right now there's that long walkway. It's not totally clear where to go. I remember the first time I got there, it was kind of like, uh-oh, I don't know where to start, how to walk in. Now that's going to be clear, sort of a clearly defined single point of entry. Now during arrival and dismissal, we will open some gates here so that there's obviously a free flow of students in and out. We don't want to slow people down coming in or out of the building during those main times. But during the school day, this will be the main point of entry for families who are coming in for meetings, parent-teacher conferences, events, things like that, as well as, I suppose, the occasional student who may arrive late. On the sort of overall stepping back, so kind of zooming in from the bird's eye view, what we have in orange here are all of the classrooms that we're going to renovate moving forward, as well as you can see in blue, the new spaces that we're building, those new buildings. I will call just attention here, as we're focused on investing primarily in classrooms, we are not at this time investing in the gym or sort of this central area here. As we think about future bonds and future investments, this is an area where we will need to invest in the medium term, not necessarily in the short term, but in the medium term to improve this site and address some structural needs there. As we sort of mentioned, we'll be tearing down this wing here. You can imagine to some extent moving these 3 classrooms on top of these classrooms. So we're still adding classrooms net to the site, including the 3 classrooms here. But tearing down these buildings, this wing, allows us to add this courtyard here. So you can kind of see this courtyard right in this space. And this will be a nice courtyard for sitting, reading, talking, eating, being a middle schooler, hanging out, getting to know your friends in this more collegiate feeling, not like asphalt, but nice, get some bushes in there, give a little bit of green space, a nice soft space for students to hang out. And we're sort of mirroring that to some extent here with a couple of grassy or turf areas that are similarly meant for students to be able to hang out, sit, relax, feel outdoors in a way that's more welcoming, more engaging than some of the existing blacktop we have at the school. Any questions on the overall site design here? Or any observations of things that are features that maybe you particularly like so we can keep in mind for future sites?
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. For the media center, are you talking about like a music style media center, or what is that kind of looking like? How are we going to fund it? And are we looking to partner with any organization to make that happen?
Good question. I think we had envisioned it as sort of more of at one point we had discussed it as a library. I think we're still sort of finalizing the specific designs here. We don't anticipate a lot of recurring long-term costs for the space, but we'd imagined it sort of as a mix of library / computer lab / open space. Gina, you may actually have more programmatic insight here than I do.
I'll just add that the new construction will eliminate the current library that's there.
Oh.
And so we'll place a new library on the 2nd floor that will be in, that would be current use, how schools currently use a library. So it won't be just the standardized, it'll also have computers inside there, I would imagine. But I think we'll investigate further how that space could be utilized, but it's not to be used for like I think music or any STEM classes, for example. We see that as replacing the current library that's being removed because of the new construction.
I would also add we're sort of in the early to middle stages of partnering with someone where we're not quite ready to unveil details, but about adding in more of a high-tech computer space too as well. So we're planning on sort of supplementing the existing media lab with that type of space as well, and that would be through an outside partnership.
Thank you.
Other questions on this, or I'm happy to keep moving. Oh.
Through the chair, Mr. Eager, thank you for this presentation. Happy New Year.
Happy
Just wondering about the gym multi-purpose area, and if we did want to put that on the docket, which maybe you'll get to later, I'm not sure, like what would be a proposed cost for that? Because I'm wondering again why that's not in these plans. I don't know if it's due to budget or if it's because the need isn't there, they don't need to be renovated, but it feels like they do based on what I see. And so what's the associated cost, or do we know that?
The need is certainly there. I'll have to get back to you on the associated cost. And I'm not actually going to speculate on a number, but it is certainly a significant number. It's not, $500,000. It's in the to ballpark it, I think in the $10 million plus range. So it's a significant investment that we don't necessarily have at this time. I completely agree with you that the need is there, and are interested in exploring sort of ways of improving that, whether it's through a short-term partnership with an outside foundation or donor, or through a longer-term new bond or something like that. So we won't necessarily address that issue specifically, but it is sort of on the list of call it maybe high priority future needs.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep us moving unless there's other further questions here. Just to sort of clarify some of the timelines around this project. We have been working pretty diligently, I would say. It feels like around the clock on getting ready for our DSA submittal and getting students into new classrooms as quickly as possible. We're hoping to submit to DSA sort of full plans in the next month or so. We're hoping to hear back from DSA this summer. And as soon as we hear back, we're planning on starting construction to take advantage of time that students are not in the building. We're working on the phasing of the project. And the phasing is really important because our goal in this is obviously to give students the best quality learning space as quickly as possible, while also being conscious of the fact that construction is disruptive to students and staff. And so we want to think about how to move as quickly as possible in a way that sort of minimizes disruption. And in case anyone's wondering, I think one thing we've been trying to do this year is try to accelerate construction while students are not in campus, just to keep things sort of moving, knowing that this is probably the best time or best window we've had to do some sort of longer term construction projects. Now, I think there's going to be a couple phases to this. So we're able to move students into renovated or brand new classrooms before winter of 23-24. But we're thinking that the entire project will likely be finished around then. I'll also just add, these are our current best draft estimates as we think about other sort of construction projects and as we think about the impact that COVID may have or other sort of unforeseen events may have. These are our draft estimates. Trustee Sibomihim, to your point earlier, I think there's a continued need for investment at this site. And so we're not saying that we're done here. We do want to highlight that we are investing in our structural classrooms, but I think there's still a clear need to create a more welcoming space in the back of the school. There's a need to renovate the gym, and there's also a need to renovate the parking lot. One question I just have for the board, we're planning on making a large and significant investment in the middle school, and it's going to be, I think, when this project's complete, our best set of classrooms in the district. The outside area, though, still needs work. And I think one question just for the board is, as we have somewhat limited time, but we do have sort of paths to pursue to invest in seeking outside donations to improve the back area of CCRMS, potentially things like the gym, Parking lot may be a little bit of a harder sell, but hopefully we can fold that into some other projects as well. I think our assumption here is that even though we've invested somewhat disproportionately in the middle school of late, because of its importance to our school, because all of our students go through it, we should continue pursuing outside donations to improve the overall campus experience for students. Is that sort of the correct assumption here? This is sort of the start of where we are looking for some high-level guidance from the board, just to make sure that you and I are on the same page. You and us are on the same page.
Through the chair, if I may, just speaking for myself here, but I think absolutely yes, we should continue to seek outside funding and donations from partners and community members, because as I think about community spaces here, I think of the Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School campus as one of the most utilized campuses or facilities here in the area. So I think that not only would this be a benefit to the students who are there, our students in Ravenswood, but to the broader community members as well. So I am 100% for it.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I would like to second what Trustee Sobomian said there. I definitely think that continuing to look for community partnership and outside donations for developing that back area, particularly if we can make it aesthetically and useful, aesthetically pleasing as well as useful, with fields and areas that the community can use when the students are not in session. So maybe some, sporting areas that can be used, baseball field, the kids use it as well during the day, or other things the kids need during the day that then can be used by community members in the evenings.
Through the chair, I will also just agree with everything that has been said and have nothing else to add.
Yeah, like what everyone else was saying, I kind of also bring in that aspect of working for an organization. And so there's a lot of funding out there that is available to East Palo Alto. So I agree with being able to utilize the space that we have.
I appreciate the guidance. I appreciate some of the emphasis around community, highlighting, I think, how central the school is to the community, both in a literal sense and also just in sort of a broader sense. I feel like every time I go there, even during the pandemic, we're doing testing, we're doing meal distribution, we're partnering with Second Harvest to additional meal distribution. It is a real community hub, and I think strengthening that aspect of the campus. I hear you guys loud and clear on that one. All right, I'm going to do sort of a quick whip through of just the other sites, because I want to highlight that we are still considering different ways to improve them, but also highlight, I think we've invested a decent amount of bond money in each of these sites, and I want to highlight the progress that's been made both to board members and the community. Before I highlight some of the recent investments, I do want to highlight that we identify a number of needs at these schools. I think, there's obviously pockets of excellence where these things do not apply, but I think as a general rule, we may agree that there's a need for improved investments to address some of these needs. Overall, I think we could add more green space to our schools. We have some uneven pathways that aren't necessarily ADA compliant or ADA friendly for our students who are in wheelchairs. We have classrooms that are in need of renovation across many of our schools. We have outdated bathrooms. I think there's a need for what some people call curb appeal. Things that are sort of front and center to highlight, our families, I assume are generally choosing our schools because of our excellent academic offerings. I also think that they could be choosing in some cases because it has a great playground out front. And let's make sure we're bringing families in for both of those reasons, right? We have excellent facilities and excellent academic offerings. I also think one thing I've noticed, portables are generally meant to be temporary. The district's had difficult financial circumstances over the long term that have required the district to not necessarily invest in new buildings, but invest in portables. And as the team and I have gone and visited other sites, we're not seeing a lot of other portables used as sort of a main classroom offering at other districts across San Mateo. And so I think it's something that we're looking to move away from and really invest in, some of those excellent or beautiful modular classrooms that many of you may have seen over at Los Robles, right? Or investing in sort of new buildings like we're doing at CCRMS. And I want to just, one of our sort of operating hypotheses here, and Trustee Ledoux, maybe you can add to this, but our hope here is that we don't have a ton of bond money left, and I want to be transparent about that. I don't want to overpromise what we can do with our limited bond money, but our hope is that if we can sort of articulate our needs well and explain sort of how the investments in these sites will benefit, generations of students, we think that we're going to be well positioned to think creatively about how to bring in outside money, whether that's state grants, local donors, other sort of forms of philanthropy to address some of those challenges, right? So part of our thought here is to highlight sort of the strengths and the growth areas, but be transparent. So if someone says, I'd love to help invest in a school, we're kind of ready with an answer on that one. So quickly ticking through some of the sites, I want to start with Belhaven. Couple of things that we've made investments in. One, we've been able to invest in a playground here, as you can see sort of the before and after photo of the investment we've been able to make here, as well as a building here that used to be a family use center, but is no longer deemed structurally sound. And so we've been needed to take it down for quite some time. And so we're moving through and taking it down now. So highlighting some of the investments here and also highlighting some of the opportunities. I think these portables are an awfully long way away from the bathrooms over here, right? This is a fairly large blacktop area, and I wish we could invest in some more green space here, potentially other kinds of play space. It would be interesting to put in something like some spaces here, maybe some additional classrooms that we could use for expanding TK or something like that, or growing enrollment, as well as some bathrooms here so that students don't have to walk quite as far. And longer term, this is a good example of this is a good space for a building. It doesn't necessarily have to be portables. So that's what's there now, because we invest in a nice 1, maybe 2-story sort of modern classroom building. None of these, again, we're socializing things, and if you see things that resonate with you, nod or show support here in some way. If there's things that maybe are things you wish to see here as well, feel free to add those either in the chat or follow up with me directly. We're also investing in some of I think that the middle courtyards here are really welcoming. I think one thing we've seen in other school districts throughout the county is really investing in gardens, green spaces, right, as we're seeing in the chat, in these areas to make students, fun places. At one school we saw I shouldn't have put myself on the spot with this one. Maybe it's a silkworm tree. It was a tree where it's sort of tied to the science curriculum. So it was both naturally engaging, beautiful, welcoming for students, but also served curricular purposes. That's exactly the kind of investment we're trying to make in our sites to really make it welcoming. Maybe that's what it was for our students and families. I'd also just note, many of our subletters are making significant investments in enhancing their facilities. So we give them facilities that we think are adequate, and a lot of them turn around and say, we need to put, $1 million in replacing things. All 5's doing that on this campus as well, sort of not shown back here. Questions on the Belhaven side? I do want to keep us moving. I know we have a lot to get through. Los Robles, Ronald McNair, I think is one of the sites where we've done significant investments on. If you want sort of proof of this, if you go to Google Maps and look at the site, you can see sort of what it looked like before. And then if you go over to Bing Maps, sort of an unsolicited plug for Bing Maps tonight, you can see how nice that campus looks. And it really is pretty spectacular back there. Nice modern courts, basketball courts, really exceptional playground spaces here and here, and then some nice new modular classrooms, as well as sort of a more logical drop-off area. And you can sort of see what it looked like before, and you can see what it looks like after. This is a good example of, I think, the investments we're making through the bond money, and also just getting our students in learning spaces they deserve. Of course, I think as Alex would be the first to explain, this site is not perfect, and I think he's really interested in greenifying the site. He has some big plans that I think we're very supportive of and excited about, of creating garden areas, outdoor classrooms, improving this field perhaps. this space is a little bit of an underutilized zone. Could we have sort of an outdoor covered lunch area for students? Could we enhance the courtyard to make it more welcoming? Is there something, we could do with this field down here to make it's a good field. Could we make it a great field? Right? Are there things like that we could be doing? And I'll also just highlight, as the primary school has moved into the Brentwood site, we are building a fence between here just to create sort of a little bit more of a defined boundary between the two schools. Pausing for questions, seeing nods, which are helpful for me as I'm sort of thinking about this, and then we'll pull up and talk through all of them. The last site here, just to highlight, is Castagno. This is I believe, our most recently constructed playground. I think Superintendent Stenario knows it well from this site, but here's sort of what you have a real nice before and after angle here of this is what this area used to look like. Here's what it looks like now. Can't wait to get students onto this playground. A couple of students have snuck on. I can either encourage nor discourage that, but it is open and it is really nice to see kids enjoying this playground because it is a beautiful new spot. One thing that I did not do a good job of highlighting as I've been clicking through some of these investments, but it is in the title, a significant focus of the bond, was called, as many, I'm sure our trustees know, many of our community members know, safe, warm, and dry. And so a lot of the bond money went to things that keep schools safe, warm, and dry, namely roofs. Roofs are something that are obviously, you don't really notice how important they are until there's an issue, and then you realize how important it is. And we spent a lot of money renovating our roofs, making our roofs structurally sound, sealed, so we don't have leaks, we don't have issues with things like that. I'm highlighting some of the more glamorous curb appeal type things, but the good chunk of the money has gone to some of those behind the scene type areas that aren't necessarily things you notice, but are really important to the overall sort of safety, well-being of the school. Castagno is no exception to that, where we've made significant investments in improving the roofs at this site. There's a couple of things that we're exploring here, and it's an interesting opportunity, and I want to highlight two sort of unusual things about this site. And then I'll pause for sort of feedback discussion on any of the sites or things that resonated or perhaps didn't resonate with you. This field, as many of you know, is a little bit tucked away behind these buildings in the school. So it's a little bit more difficult to access for our community members. Not to say we don't have community members using it, but it's harder to access. We've been in conversations as we think about ways to invest more in our facilities, been in conversations with the city of East Palo Alto, who's applying for a state grant to invest in enhanced fields. There's a lot of details and things to work out, but this is a field that we could think about partnering with the city of East Palo Alto to invest a significant amount of money, $5 to $10 million into improving this field. We're still working on the wish list for what that might look like, and there's a lot of community engagement we need to do, both through the grant process, but also just getting buy-in and support. But it's come up as an option that we could do things like improve the track here, find ways to get more community access points to the field, whether that's different entrances or something else I'm going to come to in a second, as well as just making the field a little bit newer, more renovated, potentially explore something like a turf field or more trees around the field, or other sort of uses for it that would just help modernize the field. The other thing that's interesting about this site that I think I was surprised to learn, maybe many of you already know this, but the district actually owns this lot right here and has owned this lot for quite some time. It's currently a vacant lot. We are maintaining it. We are legally responsible for it. So if things were to happen in that lot, we are at some risk to it. In our facilities subcommittee, we received direction from the board and the broader group, I think, to explore selling that lot off in some capacity. I think it's probably likely the right thing to do. But one thing that we're exploring as we think about if we were to make this a park, potentially in partnership with the city, this could actually be an interesting entrance to that park, right? So we could actually have a way onto this site if we were, of course, to secure the back of the school here. That would allow an entryway into the fields for students after hours or on weekends or summer that wouldn't involve going through sort of the main school building here. Either way, I think our general direction has been to, one way or another, not use this site as a vacant lot, either put it to use as an entranceway into the field or allow someone to build a home on it and make sort of a life out of it. But it doesn't seem like a good decision for the district, at least in my opinion, to be owning and liable for vacant lots in the city of East Palo Alto. I'm going to pause there. That was a whole lot of things. Are there themes that resonated or any specifics that are worth discussing as a broader group here? And I'll pause.
I have a question through the chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Eager, for that lot that we're speaking of right now, are there specific ways in which a school has to use it or can't use it? Just in thinking about possibilities, because I see selling as an option, but I'm just wondering what are the, explorative ways we could actually use it. So yeah, what are the restrictions on use?
I think fairly, and I'm not 100% confident in this answer, but I believe relatively limited in terms of our restrictions. At one point it had been, I think, floated that it could be a house for a superintendent. I don't know if that was a serious suggestion or a not serious suggestion, but
I actually was just thinking that, but just
yeah. Superintendent Sidara has let me know that is not a direction that she would encourage us to pursue. I think that the bigger limiting factor to some extent, we couldn't put in a 5-story building anymore because of zoning and some of the restrictions around what you can build in a residential neighborhood. So, if we wanted to use it as an entrance to the field, I think that would be fine. I think if we wanted to use it as a home, I think that would be fine. I think if we wanted to put the district office there, I don't think it would fit, nor do I think the community would appreciate that. Does that answer the question there?
Yeah, somewhat. It sounds like there's some wiggle room, but obviously there are restrictions. But yeah, I've noticed in the area some places, and I don't know what the restrictions are on these, but some homes being used as office spaces. I can't remember what corner that is, if that's Clark and Runnymede or what, the house that has all the I don't know, I can't even think. I want to call it the Blue House, where the people are working on child development or younger students. I can't remember. Maybe you guys know what I'm talking about. Then I'm thinking about the house on Bell Street at 321 Bell, where they're doing where Living Peace used to be, but then they're doing a music studio out of there now. So they're non-intrusive, right, to the community. Still look like houses. Maybe there's a little bit more traffic, maybe, but not really. But those are spaces being maintained by organizations and run well. So just thinking about that also.
I laughed slightly just to clarify my laugh of the idea of everyone I feel like right now is using their office and their home is a little bit of a blurred distinction, I think, broadly speaking.
Yes, you're right. Prior to sheltering.
Yeah.
Yes.
I get the intention there.
Yeah.
Others, either on this specific lot or broadly speaking, questions, comments, concerns, I'm happy to move on to our next section.
I think we can move on.
Great, thank you. And I hear this sort of the taking some of the silence as I think the ideas are generally in support of the ideas that we're hearing so far and hearing some other themes like greenify coming out loud and clear. I want to talk quickly just about the 2 charter schools. This is a very brief section. I just wanted to name it just so that we're all on the same page. We are required through state law to provide comparable facilities to the 2 authorized charters in the district. That would be KIPP and Aspire. As we all know, KIPP is currently at Willow Oaks. Aspire has been at the East Palo Alto charter at EPACS for quite some time. I think these are EPACS in particular has been with the district for quite some time and is also exploring making some significant renovations to that site beyond what the district provides. We are required to provide similar services to charter schools that we provide to our own schools. That can get a little bit tricky at times, but I think that we're doing our best to kind of navigate those waters and ensuring that we're trying to provide excellent facilities for our students and also for students in charter schools as required by state law. I'll pause here if there's any questions. I'm also happy just to move on. Just wanted to name that, these are not necessarily forgotten parts of our facility footprint overall.
Through the chair, I have a question about the Spire campus. At the bottom of the campus underneath the blacktop area, it looks like there's a yes, there. Is that part of that campus? And what is that space being utilized for right now?
You know, due to the pandemic, I haven't actually been able to visit either of these sites. I've been focused on sort of not going places we don't need to. I actually am not well positioned to speak to that. I believe that they are part of the site. I believe that Aspire is building potentially a new campus on part of that site, but maybe someone else is more informed than I am on this.
Yes, Trustee Polito, I'm not sure if, I believe it is our property, and they are looking to add portables to the back of the campus.
Were you asking me a question, Superintendent Story?
Right, it was just confirming if you were aware of the grassy area at the bottom of Aspire, if that's part of Ravenswood, and I believe it is, as we also,
Yes.
they are
That
also
was
planning
the
on
area we were considering adding portables to house Kit, but we couldn't because they were too close along the some electrical linings. But yes, that is our property.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is Solomon. Yeah, PG&E has right of way to a lot of that space, and we couldn't have portables, as Mr. Trustee Polito said.
Thanks, Solomon.
And I take the silence as a sign to keep us moving. I want to talk about some of the currently sites that we're not using as at least public schools as sites. So starting with 2120 Euclid, which is the district office and the flood site, and then two schools that we're currently leasing out as schools. So they are schools, just not our schools or not public schools. So starting with the 2120 Euclid site, this is the current district office. You know, it's where I'm sitting right now, and many of us are on this call. It didn't show it in the earlier piece, but it was part of the 2015 facilities master plan. You know, the building was built in 1954. There was a fire, as I understand it, in 1999 that led to upgrades in the building. The building is not in great shape. Don't worry if you are here now, it is structurally sound. But it's difficult to think about making investments in this site. I think that the architects who studied it at the time recommended that modernizing the building didn't really make sense. It was economically unfeasible. And it did call for the demolishing of the existing buildings on the site and the creation of a new district office here. The district office is also quite a bit larger than what a district of our size may need from a space perspective. We're working on sort of exactly what that would look like. I think there's some room for debate here, but I think it's significantly larger than what we would likely need, especially if we were able to go slightly more vertical. And you can see on the map here, there are spaces that are not necessarily fully utilized. There's also two nonprofits that lease space on the site currently. Foundation for a College Education, as you can see in the sort of map here, which is also sharing space with our tech office. And you also have the WIC Center here. As we're thinking about what to do with this site, there's a couple of options that have come up over time, and I wanted to get some of the board's strategic sort of guidance here, as well as sort of going down, it's fair to say slightly recommended, but again, looking for strategic guidance here, sort of path here and highlighted by the red box. So as we think about what to do with this site, there's a couple of big options. One is we can continue to occupy the current space as we have with minimal changes. It can be safely used. I think we may need to make a couple of improvements or enhancements, but for the most part, I think we could safely occupy the space for the foreseeable future, short term. The second would be kind of fulfilling the desires of the 2015 strategic plan, which called for the creation of a new district office on the current site. They estimated at the time that it would be about $30 million. You know, with inflation, we think it's probably more, could be in the $40 to $50 million range for the existing site. That was sort of the option in relaying the site, of building something on this current site. The third option could be to move the district office to a new location. I think the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, has given guidance in the past to explore this as an option. I know it's come up at numerous times. And that's in part because although the buildings currently on this site do not have significant economic value, the lot itself could unlock significant revenue for the district. As mentioned earlier on, we've come to see rental revenue as a significant sort of portion of our overall revenue. And this lot could unlock a significant future revenue for the district. The other thing about this, as I mentioned on the other side, it's a little bit bigger than we currently need. And so moving out of here to a space that sort of better fits our needs could be a good option for us. If we were to pursue that, and again, I'm going to sort of walk through a couple of different options and different levels and then come back to see, if that path makes sense to the board. If we were to move the district office to a new location, there's another sort of set of options we'd face. One would be we could rent some existing office space somewhere in East Palo Alto. Two, we could do kind of a Zoom district office where we work from home or work from classrooms or work from different sites across the district. Would have a smaller footprint for the district office, which is a plus, but would also make collaboration more difficult and wouldn't address what a sizable portion of the district office is, which is our bus yard and fleet space, right? So it's not just office space here, it's also the fleet space, which you couldn't really disperse. Another option would be, if we believe, as I think we all do, that the current lot that hosts the district office is quite a bit larger than we need, we could purchase a new space. So we probably don't have the cash on hand to do this, so we need a bond or some kind of new funding source to purchase that property. And we can then build the district office on that space. None of these first three options, I think, are particularly compelling, especially given how much space we have across the district, that 4.2 million feet that we talked about earlier. So I think, of these options, probably the most compelling to me at least, but again, curious the board's feedback and input, would be to think about using some existing space in the district somewhat differently somehow. If we were to do that, I think there's a couple of options, and we've tried to really look critically, carefully, and thoughtfully about different options across the district, and we think these may make some sense. Option one would be the site of the current primary school. It's a set of classrooms here. There are classrooms, they're not necessarily office space. Well, there's a small office here. We could relatively cheaply retrofit it to accommodate office space, move the district office here. It's a small space. It likely could fit the entire district office staff, but it would be tight. And we would still need to find somewhere else to move the bus yard, maintenance, and some of the storage space that we currently have in the district office. We wouldn't fit that here, so we would need additional space for that. And then perhaps, to me, one of the bigger concerns to this, beyond sort of the overall size of the space, is this is a pretty good space. In that I think we have a lot of nonprofits in the area who are looking for early childhood classrooms. And these are spaces that are already sort of configured as early childhood space. And that becomes then a potential source of rental revenue and also a place for us to add seats addressing some of the early childhood shortages in East Palo Alto. So we're sort of, I think in my mind, losing some of that to make it office space. There's two options, both of which are at RMS. And RMS is by far the biggest site in the district. And so when we're looking for possible spaces to move, it's one of the first places that comes up. Couple of options here. First, I think, is the slightly less compelling option. Thinking about the back portables here at CCRMS. So a couple of thoughts as to why. One, CCRMS is really centrally located in the district. Right, it's literally the heart of the district. It's the middle of the city, as I think many of us were talking about earlier. It is a place where the community already is already engaged, a number of sort of easily accessible parts to the community in order for them to take advantage of this area. This space, we certainly, I don't think we need all of these spaces, but maybe we could fit in a smaller portion of them close to the parking lot here. We would need to retrofit some of these portables. There's a chance it would be a little bit tight, but we could likely fit a big portion of the bus and maintenance yard in this space with some changes, but again, it would be tight. Couple of sort of downsides to this option. One would be this street, many of you know Relmar is not necessarily well suited for buses. It's a small residential street, and extra traffic going down that beyond that already going to the middle school is not something that I think would be well received in the community, nor would it sort of behoove the district from a traffic flow perspective. The other sort of more short-term concern with this site is, these portables are likely going to be needed during the upcoming renovation of CCRMS. So as we're working on these sites, we're going to need to move students into these spaces temporarily in order to free up classroom space to do these renovations. So this would be a longer term option to some extent. We'd likely have to wait till much of the construction at CCRMS is done. The third option, and I think the most preferred option, although certainly not without its downsides, would be to use the field off of Bay Road. Many of you may recall that earlier iterations of the renovations at this site did include sort of reconfiguring the school to take up some of this space. This field is quite large, so even though it's difficult to gauge from the map, this field is actually the same size as the current district office lot. So it could certainly fit the entire district office, including the bus and maintenance yard, and still have remaining space for other uses. So we could think creatively about ways to build a district office here, but unlike some of the other spaces, we could also think about partnering with other organizations or building sort of a broader community hub type space. One thing to note is if we were to do something like that, a larger space in this area, we would have entrances off of Bay Road, which would alleviate some of the traffic going down this road. Right? Bay Road, while not necessarily a massive 5-lane road through the city, is a much more sort of major conduit than some of the small residential streets over here. I want to also just highlight that, as I said, this option is not without trade-offs. And we know that this field is currently being used by a lot of our community. Now, the community currently does not have sort of traditional or secure access to this field, right? There's not necessarily an entrance off of Bay Road that should be open for this field. And so while we do have community members walking their dogs on this, it is a bit of a security risk to the campus in that the campus is open back here. And so part of the thought of putting something here is it helps secure the campus, which is a priority and part of the reason we're building that single point of entry here. But if we were to use this field, we are well aware that we would have to provide a greater, or if not greater, equal park somewhere in this community. And we're proposing in the back of CCRMS. Now, we don't know exactly what this back area would look like, but we are confident that if we were to do something here, it would have to be accompanied with something here. Now, as mentioned, there are sort of a number of possible options for this site. One would be to think about partnering with other organizations, as I mentioned. While we don't have sort of a specific idea in mind, in conversations with many community members, stakeholders, interesting possible uses have come up. For example, we could think about some kind of structure where there's multiple floors. Perhaps, the first floor is the district office. Second and third floor could be community office space for nonprofits. We know that's a big need in the area. And so having space that we could have some of the nonprofits that we partner with as a district close at hand could allow us to sort of share best practices. We could also think about the centrality of this field as a way to expand options for our community members. So, for example, we could think about medical clinics or other government services that our community members take advantage of, use as sort of an entrance point to the district. So you come in, you get maybe your dental work done, and while you're there, maybe you can enroll your student in Bellhaven, right? And so building in ways to bring our community into our site and also have more touch points for us as staff with our community, right? So have it be sort of a one-stop hub. We've also in recent days talked to other organizations and really started thinking outside the box a little bit more. Perhaps we could partner with the city to put a library on this field as the first floor and then have the district office be the second floor or something like that. We could think about workforce housing as sort of other options on this site. We could also think about other uses. Trustee Sabomian, I maybe alluded to this slightly, as we're thinking about the gym on this site. What if we had a first floor gym, second floor library, third floor district office? Something like that brought our community in as a way to both boost enrollment, serve our students, and provide additional resources to CCRMS. Again, we're not presenting a plan at this time. We're trying to outline some of the options. Potentially some of these options could be mirrored at other sites too. But we think that this is a potentially intriguing option. One note just to this option, as some of you may be thinking, how are you going to afford for paying all of these things? Part of our early thinking, and we want to run the numbers carefully to make sure that they sort of pan out, is if we are able to provide the land, The other sort of, co-tenants of the building will build the building, right? So this, even though this option may actually cost the most overall, it may represent the lowest cost to the district, right? Whereas if we were to build, say, just a district office on this site, no one else would sort of split the cost with us there. So we'd be paying the rent for that. Of course, us moving out of our current site unlocks the revenue of this site. So longer term, we'd be able to get significant new revenue streams, kind of like having our own ref. That's our money from sort of our own site. That could, of course, go to defray some of the costs here. But again, our goal, same reason we're not building a $40 million district office on this site, is because we want to invest first and foremost in our students, our schools, and our school site communities before we're investing in district office, right? So that's sort of our broader thinking here. And I have done a whole lot of talking, and there's a lot of patient listening. So some questions for you, trustees, as we're thinking about this, kind of walking through the decision tree that we just outlined. Should the district office consider moving out of its current location? If so, does one of those sort of options seem compelling to you? Or is it, maybe we should think about renting a space, buying a space, potentially locating at that one residential lot off Castano? What are some of the options that you'd encourage us to explore? And if we were to do something like that, is the idea of co-locating potentially at the Bay Road location, which would probably be the easiest to co-locate, but potentially something we could explore at other sites. Something that's compelling to you? If so, what kind of partners sort of resonate most with you, or would you encourage us to seek out? And I'll pause there. I think the other questions are relevant, but potentially less urgent at this time. So I'll pause now and would love some answers to these questions.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Will. That's a great presentation that you gave us. It was really comprehensive. For me personally, I like the idea of relocating the district office to the Bay Road location because it's central. When you're talking about community partnerships, maybe we can look at the community school model, and that would be a good way to get community partnership there, because generally the community school model would include having agencies on the campus. So I really, really like that idea. Understanding that using the field there for a district office means that definitely developing that back area of CCRMS, and maybe partnering with athletic companies or sports teams to help with that in the back there. I'd love to see some drawings of what a possible building on that site would look like.
Through the chair.
Yes, Trustee Bloom.
I agree. I think that the last option, the one off of Bay Road, does make the most sense. I mean, I think one thing that I noticed was if we do want to at some point bring early childhood education back into our school district, then having those spaces that are already connected to, like that's already set up for ECE, will save us. And also it's so close to the other buildings that are currently being used for early childhood education that it could become one big thing. So I think that location I would not like to take over. And I do think that the Bay Road one would be the best one. I think that sharing the costs would definitely be something to look at, because that to me makes the most sense if we are trying to create that to become more of like a community hub, including, whatever from the beginning of the presentation when you were talking about getting, bringing money in to develop the back area, right, of RMS, like this could be included in that, so that if there was a community center, this could be something that's not just the back area of RMS, but also this. So it could be connected, it could be closed off, it could not. So that would be something that I think would be good.
Through the chair, I
Thank you. I also agree with other trustees that the Bay Road option for the district office seems like the best based on the information that's been presented. And while I do share the idea that partnering with community organizations and other folks with the cost is a good idea, what I would not want to risk is I don't want to say control, but accountability of the space in terms of like what happens to the space in the future. So shared control over whether that space gets sold or deconstructed or whatever. I wouldn't want to risk that. So I think looking for partners or philanthropists or organizations who are investing in the area, like that would be my go-to, my first option, because I know that there are many people who care about the students and residents of this area and want to see these types of changes happen. So that's what I would go for initially, versus sharing costs with people who will want to then say, okay, let's enter a formal agreement and now we have certain control or governance over physical space. So yep, my concerns right there.
Through the chair, I agree with Trustee Chabot-Maheen as far as what is my preference. I for the same reasons she noted. Those are my same concerns. And if we did look to Cesar Chavez, Ravenswood Middle School as the prime location, that would be my preference for us if we are going to make it into a community like shared agency hub. I would like to explore for us to be able to do that through funding and donors rather than a joint venture with other entities, because that does change the name of the game and that does affect how we do business. And as hopefully our district grows and changes over time, that's going to also restrict our flexibility and how we adapt to how the community is continuing to change. So I agree with her. I do see a benefit to using the primary space that's going to be no longer occupied as a short-term solution. As long as we're not doing any structural changes that will then cost us money to like put back. Because obviously when you think about building and we think about why do we want to use RMS as a new location? That means we want to optimize Euclid, right? We want to be able to lease it out, rent it out, potentially do a project there. And so building something that we're intending to build is going to take a long amount of time. So how do we expedite being able to use Euclid as a revenue source? And that might be to use the primary school, what was formerly the primary school, like kindergarten, preschool area for temporary office space so that we can make Euclid available. We can start those projects. We can hopefully generate some income sooner rather than later. And then eventually as Ravenswood Middle School would be able to occupy office space, then you would transition in that area. Otherwise, we would have to wait until we build this office space in Euclid and not be able to do much with the property. So although I would love to also work towards being, serving preschool grades, I don't think we should completely take that off the table as far as using that space for a temporary short-term office space. So that's my only comments.
Through the chair, I have a question about that primary school space. When I was looking at it on the map, there's the small corner where it looks like the buildings that you're talking about, but then there's these 6 other buildings. Yeah, so that area. In this, where those 12 buildings are that are those are their classrooms for the primary school, correct? And are they continuing to use those rooms as well as the full Brentwood campus is my question.
So this is, I'm desperate to get out to the site to clarify this a little bit. So these are primarily the primary school's sort of main classrooms. The primary school uses a couple of these, but most of these are actually used by IHSD as their early childhood center. Now I get a little bit mixed up with exactly which one is which. So I apologize for that.
Sorry to interrupt.
You know.
I have a niece and a beloved nephew that attend,
Great.
so I'm quite familiar with the site. If you look at where the red tab is, on the left side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that one on the left, this is like their main area. The green to the right would be the other site. So they primarily use the classrooms on the left.
And they are moving out of this space with the intention that IHSD would fill a good chunk of these in the short to medium term, I should say. I think, to Trustee Bloom's point, I think I have a dislike of waste. And so if we can keep early childhood centers full, that's sort of my preference here. So I think we are looking carefully at the transition and thinking about how do we just make sure that we have young children in these spaces as we go.
Yeah. And to say, I think when President Latu said they use those rooms, you were talking about the primary school using those rooms, correct? And so my son is actually on the other side at IHSD Ravenswood right now. And so that was my first initial concern of we shouldn't be closing schools that are actually housing my son. I wouldn't be able to give my opinion if that was the case. But just speaking long term, I think one other thing to consider is, the early childhood centers, like where are they feeding into, right? And so when I think about IHSD Ravenswood, a lot of the students from IHSD Ravenswood are feeding into Ravenswood School District. And so, that's also something to consider when we're thinking about what spaces in early childhood education, like what is being offered here in Ravenswood, and then where are those students being fed into, right? Like the Montessori school off of Bay Road, are those kids mostly going to charter schools? So when we consider that too, when we're taking up these spaces, I think that bringing early childhood education back into our district, would be something I would love to see happen. And short term, I guess my short-term question would be, I get like moving the offices over so that we can tear down and build or something, but then what does that mean for the people who are sharing the spaces right now and renting in our Euclid district offices? Where would they go? Would we lose some revenue there? Where would the buses go? Like how do all those things work out? So does it make sense to move, like the cost benefit, does it make sense to move somewhere short term if we are losing funds to get more funds, or does it make sense to find a spot and build and then move everyone and then start the process? So I think that this is a long, maybe this is, we need to get more details and more numbers so that we can see what makes the most sense.
Just in quick response to that, well, two things. One, I wish I hadn't spoken at all about the site, given that a good chunk of you seem to have relatives in this area. So I think apologies for over-explaining on that one. And in response to the second question, I think our goal for today is really to get that high-level strategy direction of, what are the themes you guys are saying? And then we need to come back with you with a much more detailed plan. What we have presented today is not a plan that you guys are expected to vote on or respond to in detail. It's really just, we want to start having open conversations about these things in a way that engages our community and allows us to explore options and come up with a much more detailed plan with all of you. But our goal was just to get that strategic direction. So just wanted to clarify that we're not, this is sort of joining in the middle of a conversation, but also the start of maybe a new chapter, right? So yeah. Sorry, Trustee Polito, I didn't cut you off here.
Thank you. I agree with what has been highlighted. I think one thing I really want to initially, it sounds really great to move it to CCRMS, it being the heart, also providing additional space. As we know, in the community of East Palo Alto, spaces is really scarce right now when it comes to nonprofits. So there's a lot of nonprofits that are looking for homes. As a community member who's been through the process with the Rich Mayfield, there was a lot of pushback in regards to accessibility to the field and the traffic on that site. So I know that that's going to eventually become a huge hurdle when it comes to going down the Planning Commission and getting approvals. So while I do agree we do need to find a solution and a new space for our district, I think if we are gonna explore the option more of the district moving to that site, we would need to start having those dialogues with the city to kind of figure out what is it going to take to actually make it happen. Just because during the Rich Mayfield process, there was a lot of community input because of the traffic of getting in and out of that site. So opening up that section right there, in my mind, we would have to do a case study, especially around the residents that are going to be directly affected. So that's just my input.
Completely agree, and part of our goal is to be able to get sort of your blessing to have those conversations with the city and really sort of scout some of these options out and begin that kind of case studies, as you put it, with the community there. And I think what I'm hearing is this seems like the right place to explore. There's certainly concerns. We certainly need to come back with more details and options, and we certainly need to think about how we're transitioning this, to Trustee Polito's point of trying to unlock the revenue from this district office as quickly as possible, the 2120 Euclid site, while also sort of balancing some of the short, medium-term needs of early childhood space, community office space, and sort of other needs in the community here.
Right, because even, Will, when we think about whatever revenue we do get from that space, which isn't a lot, it's not comparable to how much revenue we'd be generating using it and leasing it out.
It's a fraction, a small fraction.
It's not even a small, tiny fraction of what we could potentially get. So to your point, there's a lot to consider, review, go through. But of course, tonight you guys are asking us just for direction, and it appears that we're on board with the recommendation of looking at us and seeing what that would look like, answer all these varying questions we have here.
You know, just to reiterate, and I'll try and keep us moving here. I think, click the wrong box. This box, you know, I think our goal here is to really do what I think a lot of you are alluding to, and what we sort of, I think, have your blessing for, is to let's come up with a plan, and let's, you know, we know the devil's going to be in the details. Let's go look into some of those details and come back with some more details for you to weigh the impact of this decision, right? But I think the strategic overall guidance is yes, the district should seek to move out of its current location. I didn't really hear any sort of a lot of interest in buying new land to move the district office to, or renting a new site. So I think, you know, exploring some of our existing options. The Bay Road option seems to be the most compelling, but there may be sort of temporary spaces we need to consider. And, you know, what I heard, just to make sure I'm getting this one right, co-locate but carefully, I would say, or explore co-location. If we can do something where a philanthropist involves, if we can find the money where there's sort of no strings attached, that is obviously the best option. If we need to do something, you know, be very, very careful about how are we expanding the district office? What does this relation look like over the longer term? You know, are we locking ourselves into anything that we wouldn't want to be comfortable under a whole number of scenarios in the long run? So, you know, be careful there, but interesting options. At the same time, though, I think we resonate. We like the idea of providing multiple services to our families at the site. So, you know, I think that one, devil's really in the details on that one. Devil's details in all of this, but in particular, that one, we need to be really thoughtful about how we structure that. Was that a fair sort of recap of the discussion? I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I want to make sure that I'm hearing correctly. So it's kind of more of a check for understanding on my part. Okay.
Through the chair, I think the one thing that's missing, sorry, Mr. Egert there, and maybe it's been said, but maybe actually Trustee Polito alluded to it a little bit, but concerning the space, the leasing of the space there on Euclid, even in whatever's coming next, if something's coming next in the construction, thinking about the construction of that, I'm just thinking of what comes after that. If we need the space again and tearing that space down or leveling in it or building something new, and the cost associated with that is something that we also need to consider as well. So I don't know that I heard anyone speak specifically to that, but obviously this isn't a plan, so maybe that's coming later. But that is something we should consider.
And I would highlight, I think we talked about some of the needs of the community, and we talked about space as one of our biggest assets. I don't think we directly talked about exactly what 2120 Euclid should be, but I think some of the themes of housing, office space for nonprofits, right? And some of the folks doing good in the area. We haven't talked a lot about workforce housing, but I know that was a topic back in the day, as well as thinking about how do we find sort of revenue to invest in our schools and our students. And, I think Trustees William, you bring up a good point of, and what happens when the district is 5,000 students again in a couple of years? Are we going to have enough space in the overall district footprint if we were to use this space for workforce housing, if we were to use the 2120 Euclid space for nonprofit office space? All of those, I think, are deep, complicated questions, and I think we're going to need community input to come back to you with on those. With permission, I'll keep us moving. So an eager nod from Gina, who I think's been on Zoom since about 7 a.m. this morning.
It's okay.
I want to talk about a couple of the other sites. I think they're a little bit simpler. I'm hoping they're a little bit simpler. The first is the flood site. The flood site is right next to Flood Park. It's fairly large. It's about 120,000 square feet. We've already declared it surplus, I think, many years ago, and it's currently been sitting unoccupied. Trustee Esbomian, to your point, this is a site that we could not use as a school in the future. It's too close to a home. It's too close to a highway. And it's also worth noting that the district boundaries extend sort of over the highway here, but the homes on either side are not actually part of the district. So it's sort of a legacy lot where the neighbors have moved away from the district. Over the years, we've explored a number of possible uses for this site. It's complicated by the fact there's really only one main entrance into the site over here, right? There's actually no entrance over here, and there's no entrance through this field over here. I think at this point, we're exploring kind of any options with the goal really and Trustee Polito, you've been involved in this site for quite some time, but I think at various points we explored things like workforce housing for this site. And one challenge to it is, given the limited number of entry points, it's difficult to build anything sizable on this site. I think what we're sort of looking for at this point, and things that we've talked about with the facility subcommittee over time, is to think about how can we bring in sort of significant revenue from this site to invest in our schools, whatever that may look like. At this point, we've had a couple conversations with the City of Menlo Park about rezoning the site. Currently, it's not particularly, it's sort of zoned for not a whole lot. And so thinking about, as part of the City of Menlo Park's plan to address the housing shortage in Menlo Park, potentially putting housing here that is aligned with the vision of the City of Menlo Park, as well as thinking about finding potentially a partner to develop something on the site, not with the goal of selling the site. We are not planning on selling this site. We have no interest in selling the site. We're not seriously exploring selling the site, but instead thinking about ways to maximize rental revenue for the district on this site. Early stages of the plan, I don't have much more specifics beyond that. I'm not sure if anybody would like to provide some context on the site beyond what I gave. But that's sort of what we're sort of looking at in terms of options for this site. Questions, comments, objections, or context? Happy to come back to that if we'd like. The second site that I want to talk about that is currently a school is Menlo Oaks. Menlo Oaks shares a site with KIPP, which is over here, Willow Oaks. It is currently the site of the Silicon Valley International School. They recently renamed or rebranded. They were formerly Alto International. As mentioned with some of our other sites, Silicon Valley International School is looking to make a significant investment in renovating and improving the site. As part of that investment, they're looking into a longer term lease for that site. This is something that's come up in a couple of different cases. It came up earlier in my tenure with all 5, and it came up last year before I was here with Brentwood and the primary school. What we've done so far is to give us a little bit of flexibility. We asked for a waiver for the site to allow us to use the site in ways that doesn't require us to sort of give it to the highest bidder. The state's process here is a little bit convoluted, but to sort of sum it up, we put a site up for bid, and according to state law, we're required to take the highest bidder regardless of anything else. While it sounds good and in practice may be what we intend to do, or likely is what we intend to do, what an RFP process allows us to do is consider other factors such as the feasibility of whatever they may plan for that site. So it gives us just a bit more flexibility in sort of outlining, what they want to do with that site or what that site may be used for. For example, we may want to make this a school that's one of ours someday. Let's make sure that they're making investments in that site that are aligned with our sort of desired uses here. We're still waiting to hear back from that lease. But I think in sort of the short term, I think we'd like to have some conversations really to get more context around what the Silicon Valley International School is looking for in a longer term lease. We've sort of been waiting on the waiver and also the new board to take sort of shape here before really diving into some of the details here. But I think, we're sort of in early stages of exploring that. Traditionally, we would do this through sort of staff and then bringing back for some quick feedback from our facilities committee before bringing the final lease to the board. This is, I think, my moment to put a plug in for the facilities committee. I think Trustee Polito can vouch that it is easily the most exciting and most fun and engaging committee, at least in my opinion. If Trustee Polito is choosing to stay on, I think we are looking for someone to replace Trustee Wilson, who I was in the audience at some point tonight. I'm sure may make some guest appearances in the facilities subcommittee in the future. But that's sort of our proposed approach of staff negotiates or has conversations, gets advice from the facilities subcommittee to sort of help guide that process along, and then brings the proposed lease back that both sides have agreed to for the board for approval and comment as well. Any questions or context about this site that would be helpful to add on to, or does that approach roughly make sense for folks? Taking the silence as nods. That's okay. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. I know it's getting later. This one we actually do have as a separate agenda item, and I'm not sure that from a parliamentarian perspective, I may have broken things slightly here, but I'd like to provide a bit of context on the primary school and their lease, as well as a proposed amendment to that lease, which, given the sort of nature of this conversation, I thought would make sense to address at this meeting. That is item 4 in this meeting, though. So I think if it's all right, I'll provide a bit of context, and perhaps we can vote on it a little bit later, just to keep this study session going. I'm going to use my default of taking silence as that's okay. So as I think many of us know, last summer in 2020, we entered into a 10-year lease with the primary school. The first year rent is significant. It's $1.3 million, and explains a big chunk of that, if you remember from the first slide, that red bar growing. It also calls for a 2% annual increase moving forward. There's a couple other sort of aspects, such as the district and the primary school working together closely on a couple of items, as well as the primary school making a $1 million unrestricted donation in support of the district's strategic plan over time. The primary school is also making significant facility enhancements to the campus. Just for context, this is true for most of our leases, if not all of our leases. Their plans do have to go through us for sort of sign off and approval. And usually what we do in that process is really just make sure, if the district was to take this site back, is this the kind of investment that we'd be okay with? And, because they're sort of constantly using these sites, it's very rare for us to have an issue with any proposed change. Usually it's really making sure that the changes are in compliance right? So school buildings, school facilities have a lot of additional requirements. Are we making sure that any proposed changes meet any of those additional requirements? As the primary school was sort of making these changes, we sort of found a whole bunch of things about the site. One, just to highlight, the primary school is making significant investments in the core buildings as well as some improvements in the portables in the back. Many of those portables in the back were not DSA certified when they were originally placed back there. The primary school is not proposing at this time making those portables fully compliant. And so they weren't fully, they sort of aren't fully compliant now. They weren't fully compliant last year. But the primary school would like to make maintenance level improvements. So not necessarily lifting the portables up, replacing the foundations, things that would cost, in the millions of dollars and detract from some of the overall needs for the site, but maintenance level improvements. We've worked with county council on this one. We've worked with the primary schools to try and figure out sort of the right level of solution to ensure that the overall compliance level of the site is only getting better, right? So the investments that they're making do not make the site in less compliance. There are still parts of the site that are out of compliance, but overall, the site is improving in both its sort of overall features and the overall compliance level of the site. So if we were to take the site back, we would end up with a better site than we left it. Because this is sort of a slightly different solution and a little bit of a creative compromise between the groups, we wanted to just establish an MOU between the parties here that basically just says, here's exactly what's happening. And the main goal of this is for the district to acknowledge the work that's happening, make it clear that this is what's happening, and to some extent prevent the district from going to the primary school and saying, hey, these portables are not in compliance. You need to bring them up into compliance right now. And basically the way the amendment is sort of addresses that issue, it says, hey, look, primary school, if the district is to say that with no outside direction from, say, DSA, then we would have to support them in making those portables compliant, right? So it doesn't incur any cost on our end unless we choose to force them to make it compliant, in which case the parties will work together to come up with a solution here. I'll pause here. Oh, and then just one other note. So if the primary school down the road chooses to do additional work on those portables beyond what's already there, we are asking them to think about making those portables fully compliant. So if they wanted to, say, build a new building on that site, we wouldn't say, hey, it's okay that new building would have to be in compliance, right? So we do sort of carve that out. This is a bit of sort of legalese, a little bit wonky. Are there any questions I can answer on this at this time? Or we can also talk about it when we're voting on this later in the evening.
Through the chair, I have a question. Good. Thank you. Mr. Eager, so in the next one, I know you said there's no financial responsibility if unless we require blah, blah, blah. But on this third bullet point here on the right, when it says we will work together to resolve this, I imagine that means there is financial responsibility. No? We kept it
a little vague here, but the language is we'll try and work together on a reasonable solution. We don't think that's likely. I think the primary school would take issue from their perspective. We gave them this site, or we're leasing it to them at the site at quite some cost. And then if we also said, you have to do these renovations on this site beyond what's sort of outlined in the lease, I think they'd feel a little bit that was unfair, right? We're giving them a site and then requiring them to do significant renovations on that site. And so we kind of skirt the issue to some extent here by saying we will, if that situation is to arise, we will come together to think about ways to address DSA's needs. It does not obligate us to do anything.
So it does not obligate us to do anything, but they would feel skirted. Meaning that kind of comes back to our responsibility. Maybe, or maybe not.
It's hard to speculate about how that particular situation would unfold. I think it depends a little bit on if this is 15 years in the future, for example. I think the primary school would likely be on the hook for replacing those portables because they'd be past their useful life. And I think it would be fair for them to sort of pay the full cost there. right? If it was to happen in 3 months, we'd have to think about the district's obligations of, hey, we kind of lease them this number of classrooms. Do we have some obligation to ensure they have that number of classrooms, right? So it is hard to speculate.
Was the portables included as part of the original lease agreement, or was it just the
portables were? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I was not here when this lease was negotiated, but I don't believe either party fully understood the extent of the portables at the time the lease was negotiated. So there's no blame here or fault here. I think we just weren't fully aware.
I just want to emphasize to this point here is that the lease doesn't obligate them to also improve the campus.
Yeah, I think through the chair, I'm just wondering if the DSA comes to us and says this needs to be in compliance, then that's our responsibility as a district, which then means we're responsible. Now, wherever we lay that responsibility, whether we say TPS do this, which feels kind of wrong, right? Since no one knew and they came in, but whatever we choose to do, it feels like we're still responsible, right? If they require it. So potentially there could be a financial cost to the district.
I think that is fair to say. I think this particular lease amendment, from like my sort of legal hat, does not obligate us to spend any money in that situation. It does obligate us to sort of make a good faith effort to work together on this, which, to your point, could result in us spending money if that is what we deem appropriate, as a board deem appropriate. I'm sorry, this is sort of very technically detailed, not as exciting as perhaps some of the other topics here.
See, the fun is in the details. You keep saying the devil, but it's the fun in the details. No, just
We are accepting applications for the facility subcommittee. I don't know.
And regardless, Will, maybe whether or not we have this lease amendment, the district could still be responsible for any updates of the campus if it needs to be DSA approved. So
yeah, this doesn't increase, to Gina's point, this doesn't really increase our liability in any way, right? The overall enhancements of the campus decrease our net liability, right? But we still have, I think, to everyone's point so far, some liability.
No, just it was noted too, and just for the public, DSA is the Department of State Architects. I know we tend to speak with acronyms. Thanks, Solomon.
Are there other questions? We're almost at the end, and I think the next one, I would argue, was more fun than this, but perhaps some trustees would disagree with that. So, one of the things that I'm always on the lookout for is ways to bring more resources into our district. Something that's a big priority of mine is how can we find new ways to invest in our students? And we've been lucky. We've been actively searching, and I think some of these have yielded some results. So there are 4 state opportunities that I just want to put on everyone's radar and let folks know that we're sort of in various stages of pursuing those opportunities. The first is solar panels. This came up earlier and has been brought to the board. I believe we had a unanimous vote to pursue the loan. And the way that this works for some of the newer members was it not unanimous? It was. There was lengthy discussion about it, but I think the board ultimately did vote to pursue this. And this is a 0 interest loan from the state that would allow us to install solar panels at each of our campuses. The energy savings that would be generated from the solar panels would basically go back to pay the loan, right? So the district would not reap the savings, but we also wouldn't necessarily have to pay for the installation of solar panels. Now we're still waiting to hear back from the loan. And I think as we talked about this last time, there are a lot of details, devil is in the details on this one. At one point, I think we considered this several years ago, and it would have required us to cut down a number of trees, which we were not comfortable with at the time. It felt a little bit backwards to do. Some, work to cut down the number to add solar panels while reducing the number of trees did not feel like a particularly strategic decision. We're sort of in negotiations with the state to finalize this, and then we will bring it back to the board for sort of final approval if that is the direction that we think makes sense based on the terms of the loan. Any questions on this one or any context from some of the prior board members who were here during that process?
Through the chair, I was shaking my head earlier because I think what I'm recalling is that we agreed to apply for the loan because that did not obligate us to accept the loan, right? But we at least had to apply to see if we got it, to then work through the details. But it wasn't a decision to say, yes, we're moving forward with accepting the loan. So, yeah.
Yes, you're correct.
So we'll come back. We're still waiting to hear back on this one. I think that is a very fair clarification, a good clarification of that. We're not obligated to accept the loan should we be awarded the loan. The second here is a bill that was recently passed earlier this year. It is approved state legislation that's focused on improving HVAC systems, so ventilation, air conditioning, heating, things that sort of move air through buildings, as well as plumbing, although it's 75% for HVAC and 25% for plumbing. We were thinking about making, as part of our critical facility needs projects, investments in our HVAC systems. We've sort of put that a little bit on hold, thinking, let's not spend our limited bond money on this, but let's instead focus on other uses for that bond money, knowing we have a lot of uses for it, and instead go after some of these state loans. The guidelines for these will come out in March. We've begun sort of prepping on our end just to make sure that we're well positioned to get the grant, knowing that especially due to the pandemic, there's significant needs in our schools to improve the HVAC systems. So we are sort of prepping for that. I'm assuming that there wouldn't be any objections to at least seriously considering applying for this loan, thinking that there's sort of a huge area of need here. The third here is Prop 60. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Mr. Eager, that's a loan or a grant? Because I heard.
I'm sorry, did I say loan? I meant grant. It's a grant. It's similar to getting a little sleepy. Was it Prop 13? One of the other grants, state grants that allowed us to sort of reduce, replace some of our light bulbs with LEDs and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Prop 68, I mentioned in context with Castano. It's a loan only, did it again. It's a grant only available to cities. And so we've been exploring, thinking about partnering with a city in a way that would allow us to improve parks in the district. So this would be sort of improving fields or access to fields for our students and community members. It's worth noting that with Belhaven, at Belhaven for that field, we have an agreement with the city of Menlo Park, where they do a lot of the maintenance of that field in exchange for allowing community members to access that field after hours. We don't have, to my understanding, similar agreements with East Palo Alto for the large field by CCRMS, Castano, and Brentwood. This grant would allow us to make significant enhancements in our field, keep access to our fields. That's sort of a non-negotiable, certainly during the school day, and certainly for our programs after school. But would also allow access for community, potentially in exchange for the city of East Palo Alto maintaining the fields, weekends in the summer, and potentially later in the evening. We're still exploring sort of what this might look like and kind of generating our wish list, but just curious if the board is interested in a program or a potential partnership like this with a city, knowing that it could bring sort of more resources into our community, both in terms of park access. Seeing a couple thumbs up. Great, I will.
It sounds like a very great idea. I think the only thing that I just want to be mindful of is the current execution of the city of East Palo Alto with maintaining its current parks and lack of. So if we are going to explore that, I just want to keep that on everybody's radar.
I think it's a very good observation. The last, second to last, I believe, is the school facilities program. This is basically state funding to cover some of the costs from our construction projects. In the past, the districts partnered, as I understand it, this is the way it's sort of done through the state of California, is the state makes these funds available, but you have to really jump through the right hoops in order to make sure you're eligible for the funding. There's a couple of organizations that help districts jump through these hoops. Larger districts often do this internally, and smaller districts usually use consultants for this to sort of submit our application. I think, you know, there's probably some small costs associated with this, but potentially some very large gains, right? You sort of pay a consultant, I don't know, some many thousands of dollars, but you're able to get many millions of dollars back. I'm certainly exploring this. I'm a little skeptical of hiring consultants, a little skeptical of spending money to get money, but also to some extent, it sounds like sort of the way this has been done here. You know, obviously more information is needed, but would the board be interested in exploring this kind of arrangement if it was able to bring in sort of more money for the district on facilities in exchange for partnering with consultants? Or if any of the trustees who've worked with this arrangement before would like to comment, that would be helpful potentially too. Taking the silence as explore it and get back to me as to what the specific terms are.
Sure.
I think sounds right. And the last one, and this is potentially an exciting other option. You know, as mentioned earlier, we have about $5 million left in our sort of unbudgeted bond money. We did go out for bonds in 2016, 2018. We did not do a bond in this last 2020 cycle. You know, we're about to spend the vast majority of our, you know, sort of, if you look at the biggest category here is that budgeted but unspent funds. We are not running out of bond money. We haven't issued all of our bond money, but we do, it is sort of worth at this point potentially thinking about going out for our next bond. That could be in 2022 or 2024, although we could go out at any time. You know, there's costs associated with special elections, so it's best to tack on is sort of the conventional wisdom to a broader election. It's also worth noting two sort of last, maybe slightly wonky but relevant details. One is that the total amount of bond money that we've raised and expended is lower than our peers, as we discussed earlier. And second, this one. So, you know, when we last talked about the 2016 and 2018 bonds, we presented taxable amounts, tax rates, you know, per every $100,000 or so for homes. And because of the significant tax base growth in the sort of Ravenswood boundaries, we've actually ended up charging our community members and citizens significantly less than the estimates that were initially presented to voters. This is something I think that is good, right? I mean, I think we're taxing people much less than we had initially anticipated. It also reflects sort of the growth in the tax base over the last few years. So it's possible that we could raise, you know, 80 million or so, a significant amount. Is sort of the capacity that we have to raise at this point. This is the last slide, and just curious if the board has any thoughts about, you know, when might make sense, whether that's a 2022 or 2024 type event. And some of the board members who were also here during the last general obligation bonds may want to comment. You know, the board, I think, has historically played a fairly active role in supporting this kind of endeavor. And so I think we count on the board again to, you know, Trustee Polito, I know you did a lot of work, a lot of community meetings to really get the community to buy into this.
Yeah, bonds are not staff led. They are board and community led. So to go out for another one would require definitely board commitment and leadership to be able to do so, because this is very much, I mean, staff are able to volunteer. For example, there's phone banking and things of that nature. And we did have staff volunteer for one of the measures and help out, but it is very much a board community led work. So.
Through the chair. Trustee Polito, I remember working with you very closely on that last bond measure.
Mm-hmm.
So as a staff member.
As a volunteer as a volunteer member, not a staff member.
Yeah. As a volunteer member while I was a teacher with Ravenswood. So, and I thought it was a very worthwhile experience as a volunteer, and also as a community member living here. And so I would encourage anybody else, if we go forward with this, to volunteer their time as well to help get this passed.
Through the chair. Oh,
So
go
it
ahead,
takes a
Trustee
village to get these things.
Yeah, I would say, I think that we should do it sooner. Like, I think the question is like 2022 or 2024. I think that, going off the momentum of like how many people were registered and voted, even in our city in this last election, I think that it's important for us to think about that and to even like, work with more community members who seem to be wanting to do things like this, right? I think there were multiple city council members and city council candidates who talked about, strengthening our schools and these things, and finding, connecting with them and having them also be part of this, going out sooner. I think I would go for that, and I would volunteer my time as well to do that. So.
For sure. And through the chair, I wanted to ask if we were considering putting something on the ballot for 2022, when does that cycle start? Maybe that's a question for Trustee Polito and Trustee Alexander. Like, I imagine it's not in 2021, but when does that cycle of just, putting it on officially, starting to get the people excited, starting the marketing and all of that kind of start?
We usually started with research, and it starts there. And we also would want to look at what kind of campaigns, as far as promoting how we've managed our funds to date, would be important before we even get people excited about a new bond. It's important that we kind of have a feeler for where our community's at. In the past, we had an agency kind of poll our community about how they felt about another bond and how much they were willing to vote in favor for, depending on how big the bond was. So there's a lot of work that goes early on that I would say we would have to start having discussions this year for. And even more importantly than that, I think our community was so generous in supporting us for 2 bonds back to back, because I think they understood the need of our facilities, and it wasn't something that we were exaggerating the conditions of our facilities, right? I think most people either were using our facilities as renting our facilities, or they were parents of. But that being said, 90 million is a lot of money that they entrusted us with. And I think the first early conversations is, what are we putting out to the community to say, this is what we've done with your money. This is how we've been responsible with it. This is the outcomes. We put the money to use in the way that we promised to you. And we've been, even highlighting things like our original projections of how much it was going to cost taxpayers was actually lower in reality, right? I think pushing out that type of information to our community this year is going to be really important in gearing up if we choose to go out for the bond in 2022. I would say starting this year is when those conversations and those campaigns around what we've done thus far is going to be important as the first step. Trustee Shumi, that would be my answer.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Through the chair, specifically maybe Anna Maria, you can answer this. Does the district need to plan ahead in terms of budgeting for whatever expenses might come from promoting the bond?
Well, technically, the district can't spend any money for a campaign. It has to be fundraised. 1 year we did it with a minimal amount of money. The other year required more. So it's really about the amount of volunteers and donors there are. There can be no district funds spent on a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take, people who know great people. They're looking to be a part of the work and push the work forward to say, hey, I want to be a part of this. When Trustee Bronwyn was a teacher and we went for the first bond, she volunteered in when we went out with the first bond. We had a lot of partners from actually Menlo Park who stepped up to help with either, bringing in revenue or, creating a plan, and they were instrumental. So we can't budget for this. Where we can allocate money is educational pieces about what we're doing at our schools. That's normal. Most schools do that, actually. So as far as like if we wanted to send out, for example, a mailer piece about what we've done with the money, that's acceptable. Being able to use school funds. Going out for this bond in 2022 or 2024, we will not be able to use staff resources, whether it is money or staff. And staff can participate, but they're only volunteer.
So we need to, obviously there's protocols and guidelines to follow when we want to pull in stakeholders and encourage engagement, which we can learn down the line.
Yes. Right. So speaking of which, you know, we're going to be forming subcommittees at our regular board meeting, which is January 21st. This is probably a subcommittee should be created, right? About bond, if it's going to happen, right? There should be board members thinking about like the timing and doing the early work and seeing if this is realistic for 2022 or is it better suited for 2024. Someone kind of needs to take the leadership role. I mean, oftentimes the president will get off, but the board might be interested in creating a subcommittee for this year and planning to go out for the bond next year. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. That was a lot of information we were just given. Will, do you have any other closing comments before I open up for comments?
No, I was sort of saying to Gina, I think it's going to be more talking than I've ever done, but hopefully it's helpful. I do think, you know, there's a lot of value in trying to see the whole big picture here, and that's kind of the story we were trying to present. There's a lot of interlocking pieces and getting our community familiar with it, both setting us up potentially for future bonds, but also just really understanding, you know, that we are trying to think about ways to get all of our students into an excellent classroom, you know, an outside space throughout the day is a huge priority of the district. And so I really appreciate the board's guidance on a number of these issues. I'm excited to see if there are community members who are interested in speaking up on this as well. So thank you for your patience, I guess I'll say.
So now I will open the floor for discussion. If there's any board members that want to speak, feel free. I know we just digested a lot of information and stuff.
I think we were able to get our questions in along the way.
Perfect. So I will move forward, if that's all right, with the opening up. Oh, sorry.
I just want to make sure there was nobody from the floor.
I don't see anyone out there.
Okay. Yes, Ronan, you got that handled.
So if there's any public comment, you can raise your hand now, and we will continue moving on. So we will move to item 4, which is the primary school lease amendment, which Will briefly highlighted during the presentation.
Done quite a bit of talking tonight, so I'm not going to talk more about this, but happy to answer any questions if helpful. Any additional questions? I know you had a chance to ask questions earlier.
So I will open it up. If there are any questions to the lease amendment, yay, nay.
So through the chair.
Yes.
So then the only change, just to make sure this is clear and I understand it, is just around the issue of compliance and working together if someone's required to bring those portables up to compliance. Is that the only change? That was probably a horrible summary, but
Sorry, I was trying to tick tick through the document. I think if I was going to sum up the document, it summarizes the existing maintenance that's happening at the site. It summarizes that the primary school is making changes and improvements to a big chunk of the site and maintenance at others, specifically those portables that were not DSA certified when originally placed, and says with regard specifically to those portables, right, the primary school is going to do some maintenance, but that's it, not major renovations that would trigger a full DSA project. And that if in the future the district at its discretion was to require them to bring those portables up to compliance, the district would have to be actively supporting the primary school in doing that. And I don't think there's a plan for us to do that. And the last thing that it clarifies is with regards to those 9 portables, if the primary school in the future did some major project out there, they would need to make those portables fully compliant, just as we require in sort of normal construction. So those are the only changes that it makes, I would say there.
Do we have any other comments? Okay, we'll move forward. So I have a question.
Yeah, I have a question too. Sorry, don't move.
Oh, you first.
No, you go ahead and then I'll go.
No, mine was more of a logistical question.
Oh, got it. I'm looking, thank you. I'm looking at section 3, I believe, in the agreement, in the second bullet point, during the time period in which tenant is not able to occupy the subject portables, proportionally reduce the tenant's rent from the premises. Can you talk a little bit about this, Mr. Eager?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, say we were to deem that some number of those portables at our sole discretion was not suited for student use. And this wasn't necessarily for any sort of new reason. So for example, there's a couple of portables at Aspire that we don't want students in because they're not appropriate. There's a mold infestation in the portable. So students can't go into those portables, and neither can staff. If we were to say, these portables as they are right now, even though we are renting those portables to you, primary school cannot put students in those portables, we would lose the rental revenue from those portables, right? So we would basically be saying, we would like the reduction in rent for you not to be in those spaces. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay, so I have a brief question. Do I open, do I open for comment, public comment? Or, okay, yeah, so this next part, no?
I think she was nodding that there was no one from the public who wants to make a comment, but yes, we do open it to the public, but there is no one who would like to speak from the floor.
Perfect, so now I will entertain.
Oh, there is now.
Oh.
So we do have a speaker now. We have Rhonda White. And Rhonda, if you want to hang on just a second. Solomon, you're going to have to promote Rhonda because when my computer kicked me out, I lost that ability.
Oh.
I got you.
Yeah, she got it. And how was Rhonda speaking?
As RTA president.
And, I've forgotten, is it 7 minutes? I forgot no, we have this timer.
It's 5 minutes as RTA president.
5 minutes.
It's 25. I've got a whole thesis I want to talk about right now. And you guys don't want to go home? Of course not. It's not even 10 yet. Just kidding. Hi, my name is Rhonda White. I happen to be the president of RTA. Welcome to the new board members. You guys have been meeting and I've been absent. So it's good to have everyone here. Hopefully get a chance to meet with you guys individually. I guess I just have a question about the bullet point that Trustee Sabomaheen just brought up, which was the possibility of us deeming one or more of those portables ineligible for use, which would then reduce the rent. I guess that concerns me, because why would we rent something that's not eligible for use, knowing that we might have to later take it back. So I'm just wondering, do we already know something that we don't know, or is it just normal, or did we just miss it the first time? Just curious. That'd be my question, if that is, or if that's a statement. I'm not real sure.
Through the chair, I think, Ms. White, I think that's exactly the right question. I don't foresee, at least on my watch, any reason for us to do this. This feels very much like cutting off your nose to spite your face. So the primary school is worried that somewhere down the road, someone from the district may choose to do this option of preventing the primary school from occupying this space by saying it's not in compliance in some capacity. If someone down the road was to say that, the primary school's contention is that then they shouldn't have to pay for the rent for that portable, since we're basically saying it's not usable. But to your point, Ms. White, I don't really know why we would do that. There's no intention on me for us to do that. I don't know anyone else who's thinking about doing something like that. It seems like self-sabotage.
But are we renting per portable? Or, I mean, we're not renting portables. We're renting the facility, the space, right? So it's Brentwood. It's like, it's not calculated in a way that, I don't understand why it's calculated in a way like that the portables has its own rate to the classrooms. It's like they wanted to use the facility. The facility had X amount of classrooms, and it had certain portables that were available for whatever lifespan it has. And it was as is. That's why it's an as is contract, right? So if the portables expire, I don't understand why we're obligated to either necessarily replace them, or be reducing the rent lease because of it.
So
it's not adding up to me either.
So it's kind of this is a very nuanced point, and it's a situation that I really just, to Ms. White's point, I don't see is coming up anytime soon, if ever. Trustee Polito, to your point, if the portables become unusable or unworkable and require renovation, that would not be covered by this particular instance. The instance that the primary school is nervous about is we leased portables that were not fully compliant to the primary school. And the primary school is nervous that we as the district, for unknown reasons, would say to them, that portable is not compliant, you can't put kids in it, right? And they're nervous that in that particular situation, they don't feel like it's fair for them to pay rent for those portables.
But we rented as is. We rented as the current conditions are. And part of those current conditions were that those portables were unfortunately not in compliance. So I still am disconnected to how that would affect the rent revenue. But I think Ms. White wasn't even done with her questions. I thought I saw her raising her hand. So
it was okay, because you were going just where I was going. And so my last point would be, everyone was aware the portables were not compliant. However, they are available for student use. So I don't see why the primary school is concerned or needs that statement, the bullet point that Trustee Chabot-Mahim read. So I would be in disfavor of this, and nobody's asking my opinion, but I don't have a problem giving it. I would be in disfavor of having that bullet in, because to me, that's a wiggle room to get out of a lease that which you said you were going to pay for, which you already knew. It's like buying a cow and knowing the cow has green milk and then saying, oh, well, if the green milk is light green, I don't want it. Doesn't make good sense to me. It's my opinion.
I'm trying to think of how to respond to that milk analogy. It would almost be like if we sold them a cow that made green milk, and you, Miss White, were like, I'm very excited about drinking this green milk. And then I was like, sorry, Miss White, you are not allowed to drink green milk at all. And you were like, well, then I don't want the cow, right? That's kind of what they're saying. And so they're basically saying, if we as a district say you can't use those as classrooms, which was their intended use, then the primary school is saying, well, then we shouldn't have to pay for them because we're renting them as classrooms. Now, why we would say you can't use them as classrooms doesn't quite make sense to me. I don't know why we would say that. I don't have any reason to say that. But if we were to say that, if we were to tell Miss White that she cannot drink that green milk, then Miss White would say, well, I don't really want this cow. And the primary school's point is, I shouldn't have to pay rent for something if I can't use it for what you're renting it to me as. Does that make sense here? I get the confusion.
That makes sense through the chair. I'm wondering about the rate now. So I'm wondering, because I can't remember what the exact agreement was, meaning like what the total was equal to. Was it calculated on like a square footage, like per da-da-da-da, or was it seen as a whole, right? This whole space, not really a rate per square foot, is a certain, a certain amount. And so because I'm thinking about how it's reduced based on, the proportion of the square footage. But if the original agreement wasn't based on that, then it kind of, there's a disconnect there. So I would just want to dig a little deeper on this point. So yeah.
And through the chair, just to clarify your question there, you're saying if it was, say we say you can't use portable X for whatever reason, which is a small amount of the overall property, the denominator here is the square foot of the portables. And we should just be clear. I think what I had pushed for in the initial conversation with the primary school is to do the square footage of the portable divided by the campus, right? Which would be a much smaller percent of the rate. It's kind of in the weeds, but the primary school's contention was that wasn't quite fair really, because they really are talking about getting kids on campus, right? And so they're sort of saying classrooms. That answer your question, or did I go down a weird rabbit hole there? I'm sorry. I did.
I mean, I just think we might need to dig a little deeper, because I'm trying to think of as I thought about the space in this agreement and thinking of it as a whole, right? A whole thing, a whole property, not necessarily every little piece, right? And broken down this much square feet times this amount of money. So I'm just wondering if that agreement to reduce that amount because you're not using potentially a small amount of space makes sense, but at the same time, I'm not sure that's how we calculated or came to the initial agreement. So I would just want to think a little bit more and maybe see like what that number would be, right? What that reduction is like per portable or per potential portable that could be deemed not compliant, that the board might say you're responsible for or can't use. Not saying that we would do that or some other board would do that, but I think to see those numbers, potential numbers, would be good. I don't want to slow down progress, but
I have a comment to make, but I'm not sure if Rhonda would like to finish a question.
Yeah, and I'll stop. This just seems like there was an agreement made. There was a price agreed upon. There were things that were happened. This seems like a way to get out of living up to that agreement. That's how I feel about this. It doesn't make sense, because if the buildings are in compliance, because we had students in all of those portables and buildings last year, and whatever they're going to expire or not, or the life of them, it just seems like you knew what you were getting when you bought the cow. And so it seems like now you're trying to go back on that agreement. And then I'm wondering, what else do you plan on going back on, and how many more times will this come to us? That's my last comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to even like look at our original agreement in relation to those portables, because I feel like the portables always have been in like an extra, like they happen to be there and you can use them in addition to the classrooms, but they're not like the core of the agreement from what I can recall. And I want to go back and look at that more so, because the way they're like I'm just trying to figure out, to President Rhonda White's point, like RTA president, what happens when something else kind of is not working properly, and how many reductions are we looking at potentially? I just don't know where the beginning or end to this amendments are, as far as things maybe not working as they had anticipated or intended. I feel like we were really transparent with the information as far as like the conditions of the school, right? We even shared the assessment and analysis of the facility that we had done for that site. So I feel like they had all the information they needed to know if this was something that they wanted to make an agreement on, like if they wanted to commit to, yes, we want to lease it given what we know, and we provided all that information. And I think that's just my reservation. I would like for us to look at this a little bit more and answer some of the questions that I've heard here tonight.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's worth sharing, but I don't think, I know that Rhonda mentioned that we thought the portables were compliant. Actually, we didn't realize that we weren't going to be able to meet DSA. And so that was not shared with TPS, even though, because we had students in the portables, and we would be able to still continue with students in the portables as TPS is. Also, in regards to leasing the property based on square footage alone, I don't believe TPS went into this negotiations thinking that they were going to remove portables and build brand new buildings. They wanted to enhance the current portables and infrastructure that's in place. And so at a good faith effort in their negotiations, we may want to be mindful of that.
And I similarly,
I don't think anyone here is trying to be a slumlord. I think we are being mindful and certainly appreciate, you know.
Oh yeah, no. Oh.
Yeah, TPS is what they're trying to do. Their improvements to the campus, absolutely. And I think we want to be good partners. I think for me, it just feels like before I can say yes in a vote to this bullet, I would just want to know what that could potentially mean, right? So like put some numbers to it, put some scenarios, just so that I can make sure I'm governing in a way that is fully transparent. I fully understand what this could be versus just saying yes. That's all I think we're trying to do.
I think that's a very reasonable. I think that's a very reasonable request. I'm happy if the other trustees would like. I'm happy to pull the item and get back with those numbers. There's not a sense of urgency on this. Like we don't need to have this resolved today, and I don't think those numbers would be difficult to get. So we could bring them back to you for the next board meeting in a week or two. One thing I just want to clarify slightly is this section only applies if the district chooses to make it apply. So the primary school cannot sort of initiate this section. The primary school has no control over making the section happen. It's just if the district chooses to say, you know, those classrooms that we had kids in them, you can't have kids in them. And again, I don't know of any reason why we would say that. It's just a concern that the primary school shared with us that could happen down the road. But again, if the trustees would like us to pull the item or I don't know if we have to formally vote down the item. I know it's happened to me a couple of times now. I'm happy to come back with more information to answer some of the questions.
Yeah, sorry. I think that there's been a lot of discussion around this topic, and I think that there's a couple of ends that need just some clarity. And like you said, it's not an urgent matter that needs to be approved tonight. So of course, I'll open it up to the other board members to kind of hear what everybody else is thinking, but I wouldn't be against moving it to another day.
Agreed.
And so information, I feel like I understand Trustee Sabomihin's sort of data request here is like, what's the cost per portable? And then how many possible portables could they pull and what would that mean? So those are sort of the scenarios that you talked to. Are there other pieces of information that would be helpful for the trustees in making this decision?
So how long is our lease again with them? It's
10 years.
It's 10 years. So this would also apply, for example, if between now and 10 years, let's say a portable no longer, like it expires, right? Its lifespan. And we would say you can no longer use it as a classroom because it's at the end of its lifespan. This would also apply then, right? Not just us, saying it's not compliant, but it's on its way out. Maybe it's leaky. Maybe it's just not in the conditions to host students anymore in the next 10 years. That would also be another scenario in which we would tell them they can no longer use it. And they might feel like, well, we shouldn't have, we want a reduction in cost. So I think there's more scenarios that this that we need to consider that we could find ourselves in this situation that realistically could happen within the next 10 years and figure out what's that cost structure going to look like, especially given the way, whatever the original agreement was made. Because to Trustee Chabot-Maheen's, I don't think it was like the portables were a separate cost to the rest of the school. So how do we calculate that? Like, we need to know what kind of financial impacts that's going to have on us.
We did anticipate that. I know we talked about that with County Council. I might propose adding a section. Trustee Polito, this would not apply to that scenario of the portables, their intended use changes. So that one we did anticipate, but let me think about bringing that back to council and maybe making that its own clear, discrete section where we're clear about hey, if the portable burns down, this doesn't apply. If the portable isn't usable for various reasons due to wear and tear, this doesn't apply. So maybe something like that would be a good idea. Are there other things to add or consider here? All right.
I see we have a hand up in the audience.
So yeah, Rhonda White again, and Solomon, if you can do the honors, please.
Hello, everyone. Is it possible to know what is the life expectancy on each portable, which would probably help us with this?
Right. Not only what it is, but where we at in that life expectancy.
Yeah. Like the remaining years. Yeah.
And I apologize if I use the incorrect term of compliant or compliance of the portables. I just meant that since we had students in them in the past, I assumed they were safe for us moving forward. So I apologize if I caused any confusion with my terminology.
I don't know the feasibility of that. I assume the board would not be interested in. I think a rough estimate would be more helpful than having costs incurred to inspect the portables, right? So I don't want to spend, I'm assuming we shouldn't spend money on this, but we'll try and get sort of a reasonably good guess for you all on that. Thank you for the feedback, and thank you for the long night and long presentation. Do we have to vote it down now? Is that how this works? I think
No,
it is,
we're
right?
just tabling it.
Oh, great.
So yes, we will be tabling agenda item 4, which brings us to number 5. So thank you all for your time, and we will adjourn the meeting at 9:31 p.m. I hope you all have a great night.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Will, I sent you a request. Thank you.
Great job, team.
Yes. Congratulations, President Latu.
Yeah, you did a great job running the meeting.
Yes, well done, Melee. Well done.
I had sticky notes everywhere. I was like,